And welcome, everyone, to another episode of The Kuehl Show. I am your host today, the insider of the insiders, Tyler Kuehl. And boy, guys, we got us a big, heavy show today. We not just have trade deadline coverage, but we'll also be talking about college hockey talk, guys. The national champion has been crowned in the New England area, somehow outlasting the land of 10,000 lakes. However, I am not going to be alone today. Coming up here in just about a half an hour, we'll be talking with Nathan Strauss from UMass. He's one of the broadcasters out there. We'll be talking with him about the Minutemen's victory, and later on in the show, talking with the State of Hoppy from the Sota podcast of the Hockey Podcast Network. We'll be talking with him about the amazing season so far for the Minnesota Wild. However, we're going to get started with the big trade that happened recently. The Taylor Hall deal happened in the wee hours of the night, as literally did every big trade, because apparently the general managers in the National Hockey League figured for some reason that the trade deadline was 3 a.m. and not 3 p.m. But with that, we need someone to help us out explain this and get it from their point of view, because this person may or may not be a Bruins fan. I know, guys, a Bruins fan on the Kuehl Show. Hang with me here. I have a reasoning behind it. She is one of the hosts of the Slapshot Sweethearts podcast on Belly Up Sports and Podcast Network. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show, Shannon Walsh. Shannon, how are we doing today? We're losing audio. We had her for a second.
I'm great. Thanks for having me on. I know I'm but it should be fun.
Oh, it's just a little behind. Okay, we can hear you. Okay, perfect. Want to make sure you were still there. So, Shannon, let's go over this here. The Taylor, yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, okay.
It's just a little behind, but Taylor Hall going to the Boston Bruins. This is it. First of all, can we just say Don Sweeney finally getting Taylor Hall to Boston after losing the draft lottery back in 2010? It's only been 11 years since they've tried to get him the first time, but they finally get Taylor Hall there. This is a big move because it shows that the Bruins are actually kind of, I don't want to say buying or going for the cup, but they're still trying to be a top team. And the big part is they were able to they only get half of Taylor Hall's salary, Buffalo taking the other half, and they get Curtis Lazar. Why is this a big move for the Boston Bruins with getting Taylor Hall?
This is the best trade of the deadline. You know, we absolutely fleeced Buffalo for it. Keeping half of his contract was incredible. I mean, he is going to hopefully play really well on the second line with Krejci. It shows that they're not ready to quit quite yet. And I think that's really great. I wish they would have done a bit more on the blue line, but I think this is a really great trade. And it shows this is one of the biggest moves that Sweeney's made in his tenure as GM. So, I mean, it shows, one, that Sweeney is ready to moves and not just do those short-term rentals. And it shows that there's at least a little bit of hope this season.
Right, because the big thing, of course, is the goaltending. We'll get to that here in just a minute with the Boston Bruins. But, you know, they get Curtis Lazar, and they get a little bit more. And Lazar, for me, he was a big guy coming out of juniors because he was so talented. He was on that 2015 World Junior Championship team for Team Canada. He may not be a big guy. That may just be a little addition to this trade. But Taylor Hall is obviously the big fish. But the big thing, and that a lot of my friends up in Buffalo are panicking about, is what Boston only had to give up: a prospect and a second-round pick. And do you think that's because Hall's numbers in Buffalo, now granted, everyone's numbers in Buffalo are bad, but do you think that's the reason why this deal was so fair to Sweeney and the Bruins? Because they realized, hey, Taylor, you haven't really done a whole lot this year, so we're not going to give up a whole lot for you. And that's how they were able to kind of strong-arm Kevin Adams into making this trade.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's partially his numbers, but I was looking at the Buffalo numbers this morning because a lot of people are saying, you know, Taylor Hall's going to come here and suck. This was not a good trade. There are only 2 players in the Sabres that have more than 10 goals. So, yeah. I mean, I think the majority of the roster has less than 5. So, I mean, I don't think that you can come out and say that Taylor Hall is, you know, out of the ordinary here when he's got the same number of points as Jack Eichel. Granted, Jack Eichel's been injured, but Taylor Hall's been out because he's been setting out to be traded.
Yeah.
And I think that there's hope there, but also, I don't know. I mean, he has jumped from ship to ship. He's a free agent at the end of the contract. So they did have a lot to argue with there, saying, you know, there's no guarantee he stays with us. So, I mean, he said afterward that he's probably going to, but there, you know, in the contract negotiation room, there was no guarantee there.
And that's, I think, the big thing here for Sweeney is that, listen, this is going to be it's literally a tryout because, you know, looking at it from the Taylor Hall side of things, yes, he was a good player on Edmonton, and yes, he did win that Hart Trophy in 2018. But when he went to Arizona as this big can't miss prospect at the deadline last season, he never really did anything. And that was the biggest problem with his, now, I don't say his development or lack thereof, but all of a sudden he's looking like a guy that, I don't want to use the word bust because here he is an $8 million contract and now one of the most sought after players at the trade deadline. But this is kind of, I don't say his last chance, but I'm just getting the Rick Nash feeling with this trade. And I'm sure you remember that as well with Boston getting him a few years back. I don't want to say an over the hill star, but a guy that's kind of looking like on his last legs.
Yeah, I'm concerned that it's going to be a Rick Nash situation, but I've used the comparison quite a few times now that he's got to find a long-term home again. I think that he's trying out a lot of places, and he's like, a young person in their 20s trying to find that long-term job to stick with from company to company. And it's not going to look too good on his resume at this point when he's just going for half a season this season to X, Y, and Z team and not really contribute. David Krejci is declining. He's older, and that's who he's going to be paired with cracks there. But I think this is obviously a better situation than all the pieces are there for him to be successful.
Yeah, and that's why I think this may work out, and that's why people that are panicking because Taylor Hall had such bad numbers in Buffalo. Well, look at the team. Look at that Buffalo Sabres team is not that good, to say the least. And so now moving forward, is Boston a team that seemed like they've been falling back a little bit? Does this mean they're going to climb back up the standings, or is this them just kind of prepping for just a playoff spot no matter where they sit in that East Division? Either if it's the 4th seed, the 3rd seed, they just want to get ready so when it comes playoff time, they're ready to go whoever they're up against.
Yeah, I was saying earlier today, I think it's out of their hands in terms of where they're going to be seated. I mean, they've got 3 games in hand on the Penguins, and they do have the most games against Buffalo left. So those are 2 really bright spots. But the Rangers have the second most next to us in terms of how many times they're going to play the Sabres, and the Rangers are right on our heels. We just took the Capitals, obviously, but we took a bad loss to the Flyers, too. There was no reason for us to give up those 2 points. And the Flyers, realistically, they, all their fans drop 2 or 3 more bad games and they, get a fluke win, they'll take that 4th seed. They won't go anywhere. But, the Bruins don't have that 4th seed on a lock, and they're now 10 points back from the Penguins in that 3rd spot. So, I mean, that maybe if they somehow find incredible chemistry, and they did win this deadline. So, I'm being here, but I mean, it's their spot to lose it. At this point, I don't think that climbing is going to happen.
Yeah, it's a very tough East Division. That's what we've learned. Like the West it's tough in its own right. East is tough in its own right. North is this wild thing of nonsense, unfortunately. But it's been a little bit tougher, I think, for everybody in that East Division. And obviously it's starting to kind of, I think in all divisions, starting to see a little bit of a gap between the playoff teams and non-playoff teams. But the big question, I think, with the Bruins, Shannon, is now the goaltending. Where's Tuukka Rask? Where's Halak? And that's what we've seen, Jeremy Swayman come in and everyone's like, Boston's got to get a goaltender. They got to get a goaltender. But, I mean, what's the timeline on Rask? And I'll be honest with you, this comes from me being a big Jeremy Swayman fan, dating to his days back in Maine. Now, granted, that was last year. However, Mike Richter Award winner Jeremy Swayman there is looking not too shabby. Now, I'm not saying that Bruce Cassidy should say, all right, this is the guy we're going to run with in the playoffs, but at least you have a goaltender there until Rask and Halak can be back to being 100%, right?
Yeah, I mean, Halak didn't look great prior. I mean, he's 37 years old. He was like to begin with. If it was a gamble signing him to start with, and him again, I think they've got Vladar and they've got Swayman. There's no reason to sign Rask to another large contract when you've got 2 defensive prospects in the pipe. And I mean, I thought they should have shopped Rask to begin with. Like I said, he's on a contract here and they're not going to re-sign him. So you should have tried to get a return for him, but it's one of those things that it's such a personal relationship with the Bruins that try to shop him, it would have come off controversial, blah, blah, blah. Everything around Tuukka Rask since 2013 has been a reason. He's been an incredible goalie. He's got his faults by no means should I ignore that. But I don't think that he's got a long future left in Boston. I think that Swayman, like you said, looked incredible. The loss on Saturday was not his fault. And Vladar looks good too. I mean, it's hard for both of them to look as good as, especially with how the blue line looks and how injured they are.
That is true. Boston took a huge hit on the blue line. Obviously, there's Krug to free agency, and then Chara going to the Capitals. But what is the future looking like for the Bruins now? Obviously, we mentioned it. A little bit down this year. Not the East, bashing, or I guess their typical year would be the Atlantic bashing Boston Bruins. They've taken a little bit of a step back this year. Is this going to be a trend that we're going to see going into next year? Are they going to fall back again? Or do you think maybe just a little bit of a youth movement can help these Bruins quickly retool to where they will be a team that's going for a division title and looking for deep playoff runs?
Yeah, I mean, one big question is what the divisions are going to look like next year, right? Like if they're playing against Tampa and Toronto, it's a completely different story than if they're playing against the Flyers and the Penguins and all that.
Yeah.
What great at their opponents right now, the Penguins are getting old. The Capitals are old, very old. And the Islanders are a good mix of young and old. And I think the Bruins are like that too, right? So Patrice Bergeron is getting up there in age. David Krejci is getting up there in age. Brett Marchand is middle-aged for an NHL player. I think the thing is he's peaking in his career, so I'm not about to call him old. It looks incredible. But, you can only rely on those older guys for so long until has to step up. And I think Charlie McAvoy is down on the blue line, but he's only 23. I mean, you just saw Carter Hart have a horrendous season after having a great one, and he's 22. So anything can change in those early 20 years.
And that's something I think that I'm pretty sure Sweeney and Cassie will look at. I'm like, all right, if he has a bad year, okay. He's banged up a little bit. Obviously, maybe there's been some issues with COVID and whatnot. And it's tough for everybody right now this season. And that's why I think everyone this year should take any doubt with a grain of salt for not just, players on the Bruins, Carter Hart, because unfortunately, maybe just because I was a goaltender myself, I look at Carter Hart and I'm like, that's the goaltender of the future. I still believe it. Everyone has a sophomore slump, even though he was technically a sophomore last year, but regardless. But, the Bruins it's going to be interesting because as far as we know unfortunately in Canada, the vaccination effort is not quite as going well as it is down here in the States. So I don't know about that, but if it does go back to the Atlantic Division, you'll see more of Toronto and Boston. And that's kind of the weird thing this year is that we don't really know who the best is. We don't know if the fourth best team in the East is better than the entire North Division. We don't know if the Minnesota Wild can walk into the Central Division and take care of Chicago and Florida. But then again, we don't know if Carolina is legit because everyone just kind of secluded in their own regions. Do you think that, in your eyes, you obviously follow the East a lot, seeing Washington, Pittsburgh, the Rangers a little bit, obviously, and of course, Boston. Do you think the East is the best division of the four in the NHL this season, or do you think there's another division that's really kind of flexing their muscle as the top dogs in this league?
Yes.
Oh.
It's interesting because that's our favorite question to ask when we do live streams and we have guests on. I am of the opinion that, yes, the East is by far the most difficult division. I mean, the fact that the Flyers don't look great, but they're by no means as bad as the sixth seed in the Central Division, right? But then we have people on from the North, and they say that 6 of the 7 teams up there are playoff caliber teams, which I don't believe by any means. I don't think that, the teams up there would make it very far if they were playing in their normal division. And I think you could probably say the same about the West. I think there's a pretty big drop-off when you get past Vegas and Colorado. I mean, Arizona is not, the playoff caliber 4th seed team that they are right now. And I think that says a lot about the competition is if you're playing, 7 or 8 games against 2 difficult teams and the rest of them are against non-playoff caliber teams, that says a lot about what your schedule and your record's going to look like.
That's, I think, the big thing that people are starting to realize right now is the fact that, we don't, and it's like I mentioned earlier, it's getting a bit of a wider gap. The East is so tough. And that's why, do you wonder, is Buffalo as bad as they are, Like, is it just because of their division? If they were in that North Division, would they be above the Ottawa Senators and the Calgary Flames? Or if they were in the West, would they be beating up on the California teams? We don't know. But obviously, we got to play with the cards that are being dealt to us. What do you think? Who do you think in this deadline, which really was pretty quiet? Last week we saw Palmieri and Sajak go to the Islanders, have to shave their beards because of it. That's Mafia Boss Lou's kind of way he works over there, but that's okay. Everyone has their own ways. He let the boys in Toronto try to grow beards when he was here and the way they made the playoffs. Now, granted, half the kids are 12 years old on that Leafs team at the time, so no one could grow even a little bit of peach fuzz. But over the last, 24 hours, it's probably been the craziest part of the trade deadline period. Is there really a big winner? Obviously, Boston with getting Taylor Hall and getting a depth guy like Mike Riley from Ottawa, that's a big move. Who do you think is better and maybe a little bit more competitive now and the winners of this trade deadline?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm biased in saying that Boston did win the trade deadline. I do think Toronto made a really great move getting Nick Foligno from Columbus. I think that can't be ignored. Just because it was a couple days before the deadline doesn't mean it wasn't an incredible move. And I think, like you said, the Islanders did. I was absolutely baffled that the Devils gave up what they did for Palmieri, understanding that he wasn't going to re-sign by the deadline, but the door wasn't shut, and they gave up Sajak too, and I was just so baffled. I mean, I have always been a supporter of the Devils and that they can get out of this rebuild, and they're just not showing that they're going to get out of that rebuild. So, I mean, I think it's interesting, and what's interesting is that most of those teams are either on the East Coast or in those Atlantic Eastern divisions. There wasn't a lot of bolstering that happened in the Central and the West. I mean, Blackhawks tinkered a little bit, but there wasn't a ton that happened over there.
Yeah, it's weird because you see a team like Edmonton that everyone's like, all right, they got to buy at the deadline. Kenny Holland did nothing. We're going to have State of Hoppy on later. Minnesota's having such a great year this year. Billy Guerin, his phone was on silent. And that's why I'm like, some teams have to, I say they play with house money. That's kind of the phrase that goes around with some of these teams. Boston, obviously, they want to show they can be competitive. They needed to go after a guy like Taylor Hall because they just need a little bit more, as we've seen. And, a team like the Islanders, they realize this is their group now, and losing a guy like Anders Lee for the year, that was a big part in that as well. The Leafs, it's been Kyle Dubas says, all right, we're going to do no longer the thing I tried to do with all these skill guys. We're going to try to get tougher. And they come out with Nick Foligno, which, I mean, now you're going to have Bogosian and Simmons and Foligno. And, of course, you have Jumbo Joe back there. And I'm just like, are we going to win this thing? I'm not saying now, like I said, the Leafs, they have to win out. They have to, get out of the North and then have to go up against the other three best teams in the league, which we don't know if that's going to work or not. But the Leafs made some big moves. I will say this. Did you see, Shannon? You have to look it up. Someone posted this. It was a video of Nick Foligno having ice cream with his kids. Because here's the kicker. Since Foligno's having to come up to Canada, this is the realities of the world we live in, his family's not coming with him. They're staying in Columbus. Can you imagine that right now? Like in this world, having to go away from your family just to play some hockey? Oh, did we lose her? Oh, no. Shannon, you there? Oh, no. Oh, no, we lost Shannon.
So I don't know why it's cutting out so bad. No, you didn't lose me. I mean, yeah, like you said, Toronto looks fantastic, but there were a lot of GMs that either did nothing or did really peculiar things. I mean, the Ron Hextall's move to get Jeff Carter was odd to me because they're already a pretty old team and they didn't really need a lot up front. So, I mean, I thought it was weird. And they were shopping guys like Pierre-Olivier Joseph, who is like one of their best defensive prospects right now, and their blue line looks horrendous. So, I mean, it's interesting. Not that I don't think Ron Hextall knows what he's doing, but I mean, I was confused by teams like that were making weird calls on not addressing their actual needs.
Yeah, it's a weird deadline. And I think it was going to be weird anyways with the pandemic and whatnot. On the Kuehl Show YouTube for the replay tomorrow. Obviously, we're still live here on 12 Ounce Sports, whether you're watching us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook. Thank you for sticking with us here. I know it's a little bit trying as of right now, but we're live right now, so we should be good. Let's hopefully stick around for a little bit longer because we got a lot to get to today. We talked about the Taylor Hall deal there. with Shannon Walsh. Now we're going to quickly switch gears, though, off the NHL page. We're going to talk a little bit about something that happened this past weekend. It was a big event. Of course, we talked about the Frozen Four in spades over the past few weeks, the tournament in general. We had Micheletti on. We've talked with Harrison Watt during the season. But the big game on Saturday, St. Cloud State looking for their first title. UMass looking for their first title. Who's going to win? And then all of a sudden, the Minutemen come flying out, 5-0 win. And we need to get a reaction from someone that was not just, a fan of UMass. How about someone that was actually in Pittsburgh at the PP&G Paints Arena? Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show. One of the broadcasters for UMass Athletics, ladies and gentlemen, Nathan Strauss. Nathan, how are we doing?
I am doing fantastic. I'm doing a lot better after Saturday than I would have been had the result gone another way. I'll tell you that.
I agree with you, because that was I was sitting there watching that game and I'm like, because I'll be honest, Nathan, this is going to probably sound bad because I have you on for the UMass. I did pick Minnesota Duluth to win it all. I'm a big guy in the history, and I love to see someone try to get a three-peat again, and we haven't had that yet in my lifetime or yours, so I was hoping the Bulldogs were able to pull it off, but UMass came out strong against all of Minnesota. They were the ones that were victorious.
Absolutely. I think Massachusetts staked its claim for maybe the title of the Commonwealth of hockey, if you will. I think the state of hockey title can remain in Minnesota, but UMass, I think, had a little bit of a chip on its shoulder. Being the only non-Minnesotan team, I think they were the biggest underdogs on most sports books as well going into the Frozen Four. So I think that mentality served them well. And even if there isn't an official rivalry between Massachusetts and any of the Minnesota schools, it certainly looked like it out there on the ice.
It was a good, it's funny because you think for title games, they're usually close, 1 or 2 goal games down to the wire. Despite St. Cloud putting up an effort, it just seemed like UMass, just took over, and they never let up. And of course, I think for us, I think the biggest thing going into that game was Philip Lindbergh getting the start. Now, if you ignore the fact of what happened, if this was last Monday, you said, well, of course Philip Lindbergh's going to start. He's the hottest goaltender in college hockey right now, no question about it. But the fact that you had Matt Murray having to go in after not playing, because you can probably correct me if I'm wrong here, Nathan, I don't think Matt Murray played at all in the Hockey East tournament, right?
No, Matt Murray hadn't played, I think, since, I want to say maybe January. It was pre the second COVID pause. So it was at least 2 months, I think, since the last time he had made a start.
Yeah, and that was the biggest thing, because I remember he got the start because he was the elder goaltender, got a lot of starts early on, but Philip Lindbergh just came in and really staked his claim as being one of the best, not just in Hockey East, but the entire country. Now, yes, Jack LaFontaine and Dryden McCabe probably, had done it for a little bit longer throughout the season. That's probably why Lindbergh got overlooked for the Richter Award, because he was probably the number one guy for probably the second half of the season. But then Carvel comes out and says, all right, we're going to start Lindbergh, though, because he's cleared for COVID. Him and Jasevich both cleared from COVID. They're both going to play. Jasevich, I get it. Obviously, he's one of the top scorers in the country, but one of the best Minutemen player. But Lindbergh, though, because you don't know what the effects were with Lindbergh, after testing positive for COVID before the Frozen Four. And Matt Murray had such a good game against Minnesota Duluth. You thought, did you think, Nathan, that they were going to go back to Murray, or did you think there was no question if Lindbergh was healthy, they were going to go with him?
There was not a doubt in my mind that if Lindbergh was cleared to play, that he was going to be the one in net. You're talking about someone who should have been a Richter finalist, but didn't really get the numbers in the very beginning of the season. And because Coach Carvel has been so steady in terms of using a true goalkeeper or goaltender tandem, which not many coaches do, especially not at the level that UMass is at. I think his numbers, he led the NCAA in goals against. He had one of the best save percentages as well in the entire country. And there's no doubt in my mind that Lindbergh has a higher ceiling. And I think, credit to Matt Murray, because he was basically lights out in that Thursday game, having not really faced many shots in a long time. He made 36 saves on 38 shots faced, including a really critical save on a breakaway in overtime that helped secure UMass the win. But I ran a poll on Twitter to see what other people sort of in the UMass and Hockey East circle were thinking, and it came back split around 75-25 that they thought that Lindbergh was going to get the start. But I was pretty positive just hearing how Coach Carvel has spoken about him this year and how he's played in the past.
Because he's a Minnesota draft pick, if I'm not mistaken, right? Minnesota draft pick, I think.
Minnesota draft pick, sixth round, maybe in 2018.
Rounds don't matter with goaltenders. Shoot, you can be a seventh
That
rounder,
is true.
just as good
That
as a
is
first
true.
rounder. All the Islanders fans are like, oh, what do you mean? Well, Rick DiPietro guys, hey, how'd that work out for you? But it's impressive to know that this UMass team, because they started out, and of course, Hockey East this year, as for a lot of college hockey, but especially up in the Northeast, they was questions if they were able to get to the tournament, Nathan, because of all the COVID issues. Boston University got into the national tournament because they barely played enough games to qualify for it. It just seemed like COVID, and UMass was hit hard with it as well, or at least hit with having to postpone games. I remember I was waiting for so long for a UMass Lowell game for so long between UMass and UMass Lowell, the battle for Massachusetts, even though there's 5 other schools in Massachusetts, but you know what I mean, Nathan. But that's why it's like, how does that make this team, this Minutemen team, so much more memorable? Because they had to go through all this adversity, not just having to wait out a year after a 2019 national title berth, having to miss out in the 2020 tournament, then go through all the COVID issues through this season, and then being the last one standing, holding that national championship trophy high.
I mean, first of all, I think a lot of it comes down to last year's tournament being canceled. I think UMass was a lock for the NCAA tournament based on how the regular season ended up. I forget exactly where they were ranked before the Hockey East tournament got canceled, but I believe it was top 6. And I think that last season's team had more blue chip talent than this season's team did in a weird way. You know, you're talking about a team that had John Leonard, who has carved out a third line role in his first year playing in the NHL, someone who scored more goals between this year and last year than anyone aside from Cole Caulfield. I think he scored 28 goals last year in his junior year. And also a guy like Mitchell Chafee, who's, now also playing in the Minnesota organization. So there's a lot of talent that didn't get a chance to show out for UMass and for the Minutemen, in last year's tournament. And I think it's definitely added a little bit of resiliency, especially because UMass as a program did a very good job of avoiding cases. The times that they were shut down were because of either university policy or contact tracing. I believe the program didn't have an official positive case until Jerry Harding or perhaps tested positive and had to. That was what led to the Gusevich and Philly Lindbergh and Henry Graham thing this past week. So I think it's been a real battle. I mean, you think about guys being stuck on campus for basically almost an entire calendar year with nothing but the team to sort of get you by. They've had to endure the stoppages, and I'm sure it's hard to get a rhythm if you're a skater or if you're a goalie. But they closed the season on a real high, and they played with some real belief. Especially, they basically weathered every single storm possible. They had players missing for the biggest game of the season. They and all in all, I think there's just a lot of pride around the program right now. If that gets to the real root of your question.
Oh, that's the biggest thing too, because the team and how it was before Carvel came in, I don't think it can be understated. He comes in for 2015, 2016. The team had just won 2 games. His first season, they win 2 games, but they win 9 games, and then they make it to the national championship with Hobie Baker winning Cale Makar, and then the season gets shut down. And then they win it the next year. Don't forget, people like to say, oh man, UMass is so good right now. How long have they been good? No offense, Nathan, but 2 years, because they'd only made it once before Cale Makar and the Minutemen made it all the way to that national championship game. 2007 was the first and only appearance this program ever had. I don't want to say I don't say the word laughing stock, but they were a team that if BC came to town or BU came to town, I'm like, all right, this is an easy 3 points. Let's get these and get out of here. Now the Minutemen are a really, really good hockey team. They have a guy behind the bench that wants to make this program great in Greg Carvel, who has been around now for 5 years. No, yes, 5. This is his 5th season. Is this the makings of a powerhouse? Or is that too early? Is it just a couple good years, a really good recruiting class, as we talked about, as a lot of people are talking about with Gisevich and Murray being the veteran group, and now we have the young kids coming in as well? Is this going to be is this going to be a team that's going to be good for a long time? Or is this just, hey, look at these couple of years, great, but it's going to be tough to try to keep it going against the BCs and the BUs in the Hockey East Conference?
There is no doubt in my mind that this is the beginning of a truly dominant era, I think, for Massachusetts hockey. And I think part of that is because, you look at where UMass has finished in the last 3 years. They obviously won, they finished first in Hockey East. They lost in the semis of the Hockey East tournament to BC back in the Cale Makar year. But, they made it to the national championship before getting steamrolled by Duluth. And then the next year, when people were thinking, okay, well, Makar is gone, there's going to be some regression. But, they finished second. And, we unfortunately don't know what they would have been able to do come postseason time. And then this year, people thought they were going to be retooling again. They got, Gisevich as a grad transfer. They obviously had, a number of talented guys on the roster, people like Del Gaizo. I think defensively, there weren't that many questions that UMass was going to be able to compete. Del Gaizo, Jones, and Kessel all being, NHL draft selections. But just seeing how this team has functioned as a system and how they've been able to function when they lose key players. They lost Gisevich, who was one of their primary points getters all year, and were able to plug in Anthony Del Gaizo in the top line in the biggest game of the year in a national semifinal. And Del Gaizo was able to come away with the game-tying goal with 10 minutes to go in the third period. That's a demonstration to me of a strong system. And I think there is a real question as to whether or not the recruiting strategy is going to change or not, because by and large, it's been a combination of excellent grad transfers. You think of guys like Jacob Pritchard in 2018-19, and Carson Gisevich this year. We've got a couple of guys coming in next year. I believe one from Dartmouth and one from Cornell, who could very well step in and fill that role. But the question becomes, does UMass go the way of BC, BU, and Northeastern and try and get more guys from the development program, try and get more sort of blue bloods, or do they stick to their guns, get guys that the assistant coaches in DeMike and Barr want and who they think can contribute over 4 years? I think it's a tough balance to strike, but between the facilities that UMass has, the exposure they've gotten over the last couple of years, and most importantly, the guy behind the bench, I am very optimistic about the direction this program is headed.
It's a really good point you make there, Nathan, because you have the BUs and BCs who or established powers have been since the beginning of time, it seems like, and with that comes the pedigree and the awe-inspired. Everyone's like, oh, I got to go to BC, and that's what a lot of these kids coming up, through the national programs and through junior hockey. I'm like, wow, I get to go to play BU. That's great, but do you think now that narrative may change? Yes, obviously the transfer portal is really filling up with a lot of great players from all across the country. A lot of, the big names probably picking some big graduate transfers coming up this season possibly. But with UMass winning now, do you think that'll help them get the blue bloods, as your words, you kind of just said there? Do you think that'll help them get the guys from the national program over in Michigan or down here in Michigan? Do you think that's going to get the big guys that everyone's like, oh, this is the next can't miss high school talent or junior talent? He's going to make it big in the NCAAs. That UMass can say, hey, we're a really good program. We just got through UMass. We just got through the back-to-back defending national champs, Minnesota Duluth. Come play for us and we'll still be good. Because this is a program that's still going to have a lot of good returning players, Nathan.
Yeah, well, I think I'm going to pose another question to you.
Oh, boy.
Which is, what is more important in establishing a successful college hockey program? Having committed 4-year players or elite talent? Because I think there's a really strong argument to be made that while having, elite NHL talent or future NHL talent is a good way to find success at the NCAA level. I mean, you look at how Jerry York recruited, or has recruited over the course of his career. I would argue that we are in an age right now where more players are jumping ship after 1 or 2 years to sign their ELCs, that it actually might be, I think UMass might be better served finding guys who are willing to, grind it out for a couple of years in the USHL, will come to UMass as 19-year-olds or 20-year-olds. Maybe they will have been selected, maybe they won't. And they'll be willing to, really strongly consider playing all 4 years. You look at the success that UMass had with 4-year players last year, guys like Jack Suter, who weren't drafted, who didn't have that kind of exposure, and who are using their junior and senior years to show out for a potential, ECHL or AHL contract. Guys like Jake McLaughlin as well on that team. And guys like on this year's team, like, a Phil Laganov, someone who has to skate really hard and value every single shift. I think that there is the risk sometimes when you see teams that are comprised of largely high-end talent. Maybe a good example of that would be, I don't want to point fingers at BC this year because I think they are a tremendously talented team and I have a lot of respect for everything Coach York does, but BC this year or BU the year before with Trevor Zegras.
Yep.
I think the way to build a winning team in college hockey is to get a mixture of elite talent and 4-year guys, guys like Cotton. That's why I think that BC last year would have steamrolled everyone in the NCAA tournament because they had the mix. They had Matala. They had the 4-year players who are, first of all, big. And you're talking about guys who are 23, 24. Jake Gaudette for UMass this year is almost 25. That's a big difference when you're going up against 18, 19-year-olds. Like that, you really cannot understate that. So my question for you is, how do you strike that balance if you're a coach of, a team in one of the 2 toughest conferences in college hockey?
Well, that's a real good point because you almost look at it, we're just having the trade deadline here. And one thing I was talking with Shannon Walsh was about with the Toronto Maple Leafs is, yes, you have this young, great talent. You have your Matthews, your Marners, Nylanders, the whole kit and caboodle. But you need those guys that are the grizzled, the tough, the as we talked about, the men. That's why they got Foligno. That's why they got Bogosian over the offseason, Wayne Simmons. They may not be your point getters, but you need those guys to work out. That's why for UMass, you need those guys that have been there all 4 years and may not be your studs. They may give way to your Trevinos and your Giseviches. And obviously on the back end, you got a really good talent there in Matthew Kessel. But you need those guys that are able to work hard and show the guys that come in that are the grad transfers or the kids that are coming through the transfer portal and say, hey, this is how we do things here at UMass. And that is what's going to help build this program to be consistently good. And by the way, you talked about where UMass was going into the tournament. They were ranked last 9th in the final rankings in March. So they were still in the top 10. They were the second best team in Hockey East. Boston College was 4th. But boy, that would have been, I still look at last year's tournament and wonder because North Dakota was really good. BC was really good. Cornell was beating the holy heck out of everybody in the ECAC. It would have been just, and of course there was still Minnesota Duluth with Scott Perunovich on the back end. Man, that could have been your Frozen Four right there.
No, absolutely. I mean, you look at that Cornell team, I think there was some concern because I don't think that they had been tested as much. And yes, that's one of the pitfalls of being in the ECAC. But you look at, they had Galita in goal. They had Cotton scoring almost 20 goals, I think. That team could have been a real force as well. And then obviously UND, that Jordan Kawaguchi had one of the all-time great college hockey seasons, I think, last year. And so it's a shame we never got to see how that tournament would have panned out. But I think you're right. I mean, and of course, Perunovich, I mean, I hopefully he can recover from his injury and we get to see more of him at the NHL level next year.
Oh yeah.
But I think the question is whether or not, this kind of method in terms of rebuilding a program is going to become the new norm. One of my friends and colleagues, Evan Marinovsky, who is a Bruins beat writer and also covers UMass for the Daily Collegian at UMass, talked about how Greg Carvel is now going to be basically the gold standard for how to rebuild a program. And you look at teams around the country and around Hockey East, programs like UVM, programs like Maine, maybe even throw UNH in there. These are programs that, UVM obviously just hired their new head coach, Reed Cashman, last year. Or no, sorry, not Reed Cashman. That's Dartmouth. My bad. They hired their new coach last year. Maine, of course, after the tragic loss of Reg Gendron, they're going to be looking for a coach as well. this is, I think UMass as a public institution, first of all, I think this is going to become the blueprint for a lot of programs who are looking to get themselves back into, maybe to reclaim some of the glory days, if you will, which for UMass were not existent, but for other schools like Maine or UMass Lowell or UVM, you think about the great goalies that they've had throughout the years. I think UMass could, this sort of model of building could be something promising for the future.
It'll be interesting because and that's what people like. They look at college hockey like, oh, it's a 4-year thing. That's it. I'm like, nothing. There's no similarities in college hockey and the NHL. It's only like 30 games in college hockey where it's 82. Well, here's the thing about like the standard of winning change. Like it changes with whoever wins the championship. The Blues win in 2019. Everyone's like, oh my gosh, you got to get tough and you got to get a hot goaltender. And everyone all of a sudden wants to become 19. And that's true. People like to say that's not existent. They think it's all a myth, but it's true. UMass can show now, I'm like, hey guys, we can do this with our way. And of course, don't forget, to talk about the team that UMass had to beat to get there, Scott Sandelin. Look how long it took him to make that program the power that it is today. The amount of years, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, if I can do it off the top of my head, it was 27 years in between national championship title game berths, not wins, berths, because they made it back in 84 against, and they actually lost to Bowling Green, who was coached by the great Jerry York. Now,
of course,
it took a few years for them to get around, but Scott Sandlin was able to pull it around, and now UMD, even in that incredible, because that was back in the WCHA days, but now they're in this extremely tough NCHC, and they're always there at the top of the conference, showing that they can beat either the St. Clouds or the North Dakotas, or Denver had a little bit of a bad year this year, but typically Denver. And that's why I think, like, when you have one team that's going to win, like, oh, wow, this is now the standard to win. And I think Carvel now has that, I won't say the responsibility, but now the title of, hey, look, guys, this is how you build a program because this is how the guys that just won this thing just did it. If that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. And I think another thing that's going to help is that I think NHL head coaches and scouts and front offices are looking at this program and thinking, wow, this is a place where we would feel comfortable. And this is a coach with whom we would feel comfortable letting our guys develop, even if it means taking an extra year so that maybe they don't burn a year of their ELCs. Like, you think about guys like Matt Kessel, who were not unheralded, but who weren't, jumping to the front of anyone's lists. He came into UMass, had an excellent freshman campaign, ends up getting drafted by the St. Louis Blues, and now we're hearing from Keith Tkachuk that there's conversations about maybe, he makes the jump. But although the latest thing is that I think St. Louis wants him to spend his junior year at UMass, or guys like Zach Jones, who, was a third rounder for the Rangers. Look at how he's developed. You get another guy, Josh Lopina this year, who had an excellent freshman year, has an absurd faceoff percentage, really great two-way skater. And, he's going to end up going, I think a lot of draft boards have him in the 4th or 5th round. So seeing that it is sustainable to leave guys in the system, I think is one of the reasons that UMass is going to continue to be successful. Because I think you look at, maybe the mindset of someone like Matt Boldy or Trevor Zegras, guys who are 1st and 2nd round talent. Eventually there's a diminishing return between staying and playing for your 2nd or 3rd year in pursuit of a national title at a blue blood school like BU or BC. And nothing against those guys, because by all means, go and get paid, go and play, go and start your career. But I think there's also a place for guys who want to stick and get an education for a couple of years, develop a little bit more, and then make the jump to the AHL or NHL after getting a national title. And I think that's sort of what motivated Zach Jones to stick around this year. And reports out of New York from Molly Walker today that he might be, and Frank Saravelli, that he might be signing his ELC within the week. So I think it's a sustainable model, and I think it's a testament to Coach Carvel, but really the institution as a whole.
Yeah, and of course, talking about guys that just signed, Cole Caulfield, the Hobie Baker Award winner, even though I thought Dryden McKay should have won it, but that's neither here nor there. But Cole Caulfield then gets 2 points in his pro debut against the Toronto Marlies. Of course, go figure, against my team. But we talked about all that. Of course, we're talking about the Leafs, talk about guys that stick around for all 4 years and end up getting their education and moving on. How about Zach Hyman? He's not just a great forward and gives pucks to Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner. He's also a children's book author. How about that? doing double duty there. But Nathan, we got to talk about, we talked about UMass winning, great game, awesome plays all around. We had that sick highlight reel goal by Lagunov that nobody thought was going to come out. But let's get to what Nathan Strauss did in Pittsburgh, because you were there all weekend. Talk about that experience, because it's so interesting to look at it, because, it's not a packed barn like we're used to in years past. It had to be, obviously, everyone had to be spaced out a little bit, but tell us about your experience in Pittsburgh. You and UMass Reindeer out there having some fun watching the Minutemen win it all.
Exactly. So first and foremost, it was a really unique experience for me because I'm so accustomed to covering UMass sports as a member of the media.
Right.
And this was the first time, basically since my first weekend at UMass, that I was able to go to a game or set of games as a fan. It obviously came in really interesting circumstances. This is just the first professional hockey game, the first hockey game that I've been to as a fan since COVID. But it was really enjoyable. I think there's something really special about the community of college hockey in particular. First of all, I want to shout out as well all of the Minnesotans out there, because every single one of you that I ran into was just so kind. Like, even after the UMD game, people were coming up to me in the street and saying, congratulations, like, best of luck. They were buying people drinks. Like, it was a really special, congenial environment that I think I hadn't really been a part of ever before. And I certainly think that it was something that has been missing since COVID, was that sense of community and whatnot. And now that more and more people are getting vaccinated and things are potentially returning to a safer standard, at least here in the States.
Yeah.
I feel bad for everyone in Ontario right now, but at least here in the States. It was just an excellent experience. And watching hockey as a fan is just so much fun. And being sat where I was all the way up top, it was definitely an interesting viewpoint, because I was really able to see, how the UMass 1-2-2 sets up, how they were setting up their rushes. Like, it was a different vantage point for me than from press row where I'm used to. So by and large, very grateful that I was able to have the experience, and I'm hopeful that I'll be able to do the same thing next year at TD Garden and in upcoming seasons.
Yeah, I was hoping last year would have been great, because I was getting ready. I had my credentials. I was going to go to Detroit, and then they decided that this COVID thing was a little crazy. And I'm like, well, at least they'll come back after Pittsburgh, right? Psych! NCAA says we got to wait for the next round of national title locations to be announced. Boston TD Garden is obviously a great venue. I know a lot of people that go out there. They love it. But it'd been nice to go, because the LCA, especially how the Joe Louis was at the end, let's use the beautiful new LCA while we can before it turns into a dump like the JLA was. But then again, it was a beautiful dump. I was there the last season when, like, all the seats were, like, torn apart whenever people were trying to rip out stuffing of it to take home with it. It was an interesting environment. We have been chatting with Nathan Strauss. He's one of the broadcasters and members of the media for UMass Athletics. He was there at the national championship, the Frozen Four, saw them beat the defending champs UMD and then knock off St. Cloud State, ending their Cinderella run as well to become first-time national champs. Follow him at Nathan P. Strauss as well. Also check out his podcast, Corner Kick. He's obviously, Nathan Strauss, a big footy fan, as I am as well. Nathan, are you an Arsenal fan from what I think I've gotten from the tweets there?
I sure am.
That's a darn shame.
Got the tattoo to prove it.
Darn shame. I'm a Man U guy, and I'm a Red for life. I'm a Red Devil for life. I'll never let that one go. As long as I say this, Man U, they've not had a good year this year, and it's tough with their staff, whatever. But as long as they just beat City and they beat Liverpool, Arsenal, I give you guys a little bit of credit every so often. But as long as they beat those two, I'm all that makes me happy.
Well, fair enough. Thank you for having me. I appreciate you reaching out.
Oh, man. You know what? It's always fun to talk to people that obviously not just fans of the game of college hockey, but people that follow the game and know the game well. We had Pat Micheletti on from Minnesota before the tournament as well. It's just fun because even though this whole NHL ESPN thing's coming around, as we kind of learn, you were there. You didn't have, some of us have to suffer and have to see the coverage from ESPN. It's going to get better. They did a good job there with ESPN, but there's room for improvement on some aspects of it. But that's just from my take as a fellow broadcaster, and I'm going to leave it at that. Nathan, you were there. You got to see it. You didn't have to hear anything. You just got to yell and scream and watch hockey. You enjoyed it, right?
Absolutely.
Nathan, we'll talk to you again sometime soon, and we'll be back with more. We'll be back with State of Hoppy from the Sota podcast here on The Kuehl Show. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to MyBookie. You're ready to create an account and start making money, and we're here to help. And remember, you can get a bonus of up to $1,000 on your first deposit. Now you're ready to bet. Just go to mybookie.ag, visit the sportsbook, click on your bet, and input the amount you want to risk or win in the bet slip. Yes, it's that easy. Just remember, at MyBookie, you play, you win, you get paid.
And welcome back to the Kuehl Show, everyone. Tyler Kuehl here, the Insider of the Insiders, on a show that once again has been up and down, sideways, and backwards and forwards. We were able to get Shannon Walsh on from Slapshot Sweethearts podcast from the Belly Up Sports Network. That was awesome and fun. Hopefully we can salvage that interview for you folks to watch on the YouTube channel. And, of course, your favorite podcatcher as well on the replay. But, of course, you're here live on 12 Ounce Sports here on this Monday, April the 12th. Trade deadline is all wrapped up. And we were talking about, Boston who made some moves. And we're talking about Buffalo that decided to give everyone away for a bag of pucks and a beer. Speaking of beer, how about we talk with someone from the land of 10 bajillion lakes. Now, hold on. It's not Pat Micheletti. We'll get him on later, guys. Calm down. We got a guy who is up from Minnesota, right in the Twin Cities. He likes the Minnesota Wild. He likes Minnesota hockey. He is one of the hosts for the Sota Pod on the Hockey Podcast Network. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show, State of Hoppy. State, how we doing today? Or Hoppy, how we doing today?
The Wolves here, leading with Pat Micheletti. What are you doing to me? Expectations through the roof.
I will say this, Hoppy. The first time we went on our live show, a good buddy of mine, Harrison Watt, Ferris State broadcaster, had him on to cap off the show, the 8 o'clock hour, here at 8 o'clock Eastern time, 7 o'clock your time there in Minnesota. He had to follow up Ken Cal of the Detroit Red Wings and Jack Michaels of the Edmonton Oilers. He was rattled, to say the least, when he saw the lineup. He's like, why am I the last guy?
Oh, man. Well, I got to say, your viewers definitely caught a lucky bounce here because I've been told that I have a face for radio and a voice for blogging. So, fortunately, they only have to deal with half of that.
Well, I would tell you, if our Wi-Fi worked, we'd have to see that beautiful face of your Hoppy. But unfortunately, the Wi-Fi gods decided to say no today. So I guess you're off the hook today.
As are the viewers. It's perfect. But no, hey, doing as good as I can be given everything that's going on. But, even with everything that's happening down here in Minnesota right now, can't ruin one of my favorite holidays, being trade deadline.
Oh, man, it's been crazy. Of course, Minnesota Wild, the Twins, and the Timberwolves all postponing their games tonight. Obviously, there's a lot going on there. But before we get to the trade deadline, Hoppy, what was your reaction to the Frozen Four this weekend? We just talked with Nathan Strauss, big UMass broadcaster, big UMass supporter. He's ecstatic. But the three Minnesota teams that made it to the Frozen Four, unable. You thought the odds were in their favor. Unfortunately, Mavs go down to St. Cloud, but of course that had to happen. They faced off against each other. But then UMD bowed out in the semifinals as well. What was your take from the Frozen Four this past weekend?
You know what, Tyler? My co-host on the Sota Pod is from Canada, and he's slowly trying to indoctrinate himself into Minnesota fandom. And, this is pretty much it in a nutshell. 3 out of 4 teams, and you don't come out with the hardware. I will say a couple positive notes, though. First and foremost, the last year of having 5 Division I programs in Minnesota, we got all 5 in for the first time in history. Next year, we jump up to 6, just further cementing the state of hockey label. But tell you what, UMass coming in, that's a team that I was watching out for. I actually had, before COVID jumped in, I had Michigan and them facing off in the Frozen Four to see who would go on to the championship. I had Michigan, but as soon as that changed, I'm like, well, I guess UMass is going to make it. But I was really hopeful with St. Cloud, Minnesota, and Mankato on the other side that we were going to get one of them pushing through and being able to joust with UMass. And, I mean, I don't need to tell anyone that watched the game. It was
didn't go well.
That.
No, the thing was, and I was really hoping for Mankato as well. I broadcasted games with Ferris State. I got to see Dryden McKay. I got to see Dryden McKay get pulled, which was the craziest thing about it. I was full Dryden McKay for Hobie Baker and, of course, Mike Richter. And then Jack LaFontaine gets the award. And I'm like, but what was the point of Dryden McKay getting the Hobie Baker nominee, but then you give it to LaFontaine, who, I'm not saying LaFontaine's a bad goaltender. He had an incredible year there with the Gophers. But if McKay's nominated for the Hobie, doesn't that make him the best goaltender in the country? Isn't that right, Hoppy?
Man, I'm a Gopher fan first and foremost, and I can't explain that debacle to you. Again, kudos to LaFontaine because, in a normal year, he is the caliber of a Richter winner.
Oh yeah,
you can't nominate a goalie for the Hobie and not give him the Richter. It makes zero sense to me whatsoever. Especially, let's be real, he's got to get a couple extra votes for just that name alone.
Exactly. And that's the thing, too. That's why, like, last year with Jeremy Swayman, we talked about him with Shannon Walsh earlier because he's having a good start there with the Bruins. And last year, it's like, oh, hey, he's a Hobie Baker nominee. Well, of course, he's the Mike Richter Award winner because, duh. Well, that's what makes me wonder. I don't know how it works for the voting for Hobie Baker because Minnesota State didn't really have the best game against St. Cloud in that semifinal. And it did make Dryden McKay look a little mortal, which for 95% of this season, he looked like the Terminator in net. So I don't know if that's kind of affected the voting or not because, man, he had such an incredible year. Hopefully he'll stay back next year and he'll break that Ryan Miller shutout record of most shutouts in a career because he's just a really good goaltender on a really good team.
Well, and I mean, if they're going to go that route and they're going to include the postseason, like he outdueled LaFontaine, and Gophers have better offensive firepower anyways. So
yep.
The fact that he advanced over them, again, if we're going to use that as the argument, I still don't see it. So, yeah, I'm happy to come up with a million different ways that we can try and make sense of it, but I think we just have to agree that it makes no sense.
I think, Hoppy, you and I can agree on the one thing, though, in terms of college hockey. And this is going to stink because the WCHA has this long, short history, but since the split of the Big Ten and the NCHC away from the WCHA, where it really left just Bemidji and Minnesota State as really the top two teams. Obviously, Tech had a few good years there as well. The WCHA has been one of the, I don't say bottom dwellers, but they're looked at in the same aspect of Atlantic hockey and ECAC based on their prestige compared to the NCHC's Big Tens and, of course, Hockey East.
Yeah, and it's interesting, too, because like you can't even bring pairwise into the discussion for just that reason this year because there's no out-of-conference play.
Yep.
I will say, though, that I think Mankato came into this tournament a little bit more grizzled and ready for postseason competition because, yeah, they're not going up against, like, stalwart offensive powers, but they're grinding out victories. Like, these are teams that are going to battle. You got a lot of 24, 25-year-olds on a lot of those teams. It's a way different brand of hockey that you have to compete with. And again, they dominated it. So, no, the WCHA is nothing like it was because in the days of old, I would hear no argument that anything was better than the WCHA. I think we've almost transitioned to this point of anointing the NCHC being that next tier of just college hockey greatness.
And, of course, half the teams that are good in that conference are from the old WCHA, your Denvers, North Dakotas. Go figure, right? And, of course, now they're going to become the CCHA. Now, that's probably because they didn't want to go to Huntsville or didn't want to go to Alaska anymore. But I digress. I don't need to talk about the politics. But they're going to try to find a way to get a little bit more prestige, maybe getting rid of those smaller schools. But, and I hate to use the word get rid of, but we'll just have to wait and see with that. Of course, Minnesota State finished last year before the shutdown. They were the number 3 team still. So I don't know what people need to realize that Minnesota State is for real. Let's jump back on the National Hockey League side here, Hoppy. It's been a weird 24 hours. We saw the big move, the big fish Taylor Hall go for, like I said, a bag of pucks and a new laundry machine there for for Buffalo. Obviously needs something new to clean up that franchise. Get it? Because it's a laundry mat. Anyways, I think the big thing for looking at the Minnesota Wild sort of thing here, Hoppy, is the fact that Bill Guerin's phone was on silent. Nothing really happened. But I ask you this. Was that a good move for Bill Guerin not to go buying at the deadline? Despite this team, right now, the Wild, 3rd in the division. They are a few points behind Vegas, but they played the Knights very well, and they're a few points ahead of St. Louis. They played St. Louis really well. Are the Wild good with what they have right now, you think? Is that why Guerin didn't make any big moves or selling or buying anything at the deadline?
I think there's a lot that goes into that. And before I tackle all of that, I will throw out a hot take that Taylor Hall was not the trade of the deadline. I think that the last hour there, I think it actually came through after we were supposed to be done. I think the Mantha trade was the trade of the deadline.
That was a big one. And that's the weird thing. Like that hour after the deadline, that's when I was like, oh my gosh, 3:00's the deadline. I'm like, guys, we're going to be talking about trades to like 4:30 because everyone makes the call at 2:59 Eastern time. And it takes a little bit for them to come through. But yeah, that move by Mantha. And it's funny because it was about I think it was about 3:30. I was on the phone with my dad, who is a Detroit Red Wings fan. I myself am a Leafs fan, so I'm kind of I'm optimistic with the Foligno trade, but I'm like, okay, we better win then with him. But I was talking and he's like, all right, Tyler, what's going on the deadline? Well, the Wings got rid of Johnny Merrill, but Stevie's been doing pretty quiet right now. He hasn't really gotten any of the big names. He's like, okay, do we still have Mantha? I'm like, yeah, we still got Mantha. I'm like, okay, cool. Hung up the phone. 5 minutes later, Anthony Mantha gets traded to Washington. Okay, good for Wash. Well, in the deal, that was like I said, probably the last big one of the day. They were able to get a few players out of it because it was just Mantha that went over to Washington. Detroit gets Jakob Vrana and Richard Panik, a couple of low-name guys. Vrana's playing some big minutes at times. But that's
what I'm going to argue with you, man. I think Vrana's a player.
Yeah.
And
he's making 3.35.
He can get the job done, man. You look at his numbers, 5-on-5, like he's top 20, top 25 in the league the last couple of years as far as just what he's doing analytically. Now, granted, I think Mantha's the better player, no doubt, but I just think that Stevie Yzerman doing his best Ray Shero impression from the past decade, and just like he won that deal, no question, but Washington still got notedly better today.
And I think,
go
ahead, Poppy. Sorry.
Well, no, I was just going to say, like, that's the perfect storm for everyone. Like, Yzerman gets the total win, and Washington has a real chance to make a better push right now.
The picks that went to Detroit, a 2021 first-round pick, which, knowing, I don't know, Washington's a question mark for me because it seems like since they won the Cup, they are like, hey, we're good. We'll try to compete, but it's like if we don't win, we don't care. If we lose to Carolina in the first round, nobody cares. 2022 second-round pick also going to Detroit. It'll be interesting what they use for that pick next year. Like you said, Vrana's big. Richard Panik, his career's kind of taken a little bit of a dip, but I remember him back when he was a Leaf early on in his career. He has some potential, but I think Washington, they get this deal for Anthony Mantha, and it's because they need a little bit more scoring and, to be honest, a little bit more youth. It's weird to say because Mantha, I've seen him literally come from Val d'Or through Grand Rapids up through Detroit. And I'm like, he's not a young guy anymore, but on that Capitals team, he looks like the one that's going to be the DD for those guys.
Oh, absolutely. And, I mean, he's never been in a situation like this where he's probably going to come in and play on the second line. He's going to be playing with the same caliber of talent on the ice, but he's going up against second-line matchups instead of first. Like, he's never seen that before.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting. I when we get to playoff time and start making predictions, I'll still probably think Washington. They'll probably win the first round. Given that, actually, I don't know who they may end up getting Boston. Who knows how that's all gonna go. But I look at this going back to the Minnesota side of things here. I don't know what it is. I don't know. I can never describe it. Maybe it's because they are the state of hockey. I've always had this fascination towards the Minnesota Wild. Maybe even over the Detroit Red Wings. I like all of the American teams. I think my top two are probably Minnesota and Florida. It doesn't make any sense geographically, but just follow me on this.
Oh, okay.
Well, they've always
it makes absolute sense geographically. You're in Minnesota in the summer and you go to Florida in the winter.
Exactly. One of those, maybe a snowbird, right? But I mean, Florida's always been my dark horse. The year, of course, I don't pick them to be my dark horse to make the playoffs. They're one of the best teams in the league. Go figure. But the Minnesota Wild, they didn't make any moves. But I look at this team, Hoppy, and I'm like, did they? And I'm not saying they should have made moves because I'm not going to say the Wild are a Stanley Cup contender. I'm not going to do that because, trust me, I'm a Leafs fan, and the word Stanley Cup contender comes out every September, and it never works out. So, but they're still really good. Yeah, they're 5-3-2 in their last 10 games, and yeah, they've had some tough goes. I mean, they flip-flop routes with Colorado in recent weeks. But, what is your take on this team this year? They're really good. They have talent. Of course, we talk about Kaprizov. He's the Calder Trophy nominee. He's the winner. Who am I kidding? I'm not even, unless something drastic happens where, I don't know, Alex Nedeljkovic all of a sudden becomes a starter in Carolina. He goes on a 10-game win streak. This Minnesota team, they may make some hay in the playoffs, Hoppy.
I was going to say, the Calder's going to someone with the initials KK that plays for the Wild. Take your pick between the two, but...
unfortunately, there's no such thing as a goaltender Calder Trophy winner. I'm a goaltender myself, and even I know that's true.
Yeah, probably not. But, hey, one can dream.
Exactly.
As far as Guerin's deadline goes, I mean, I'm a huge fan of it. And first off, I'm just a fan of everything that Bill Guerin does. He really came into this. You got to look at it from a lot of different spectrums. You said it already, and I completely agree. They are not contending this year. If they could go in and push either Vegas or Colorado to 6 or 7 games, that would be incredible. That is what I'm hoping for. But yeah, going out and, in a weird year like this, going out and trading futures to bring in a rental, it just didn't make sense. That wasn't of interest to him. So what's he looking for? He's looking for guys with term. He's looking for a guy that he's actually adding long term. And like those deals just really aren't being made right now. Those are deals that are going to be made this summer. And he doesn't want to trade off some of those end of their contract guys right now, like a Nick Bonino, Nick Bugstead, because those are the guys that are kind of helping fuel this along. And you saw what happened at the deadline here. You're not going to get anything for them anyways. So it's kind of saying, hey guys, you've worked your way here. Let's see what you can do, right?
Yeah.
Like kind of rewarding them in the sense by not selling anything off when it might have made sense long term to do so. And they're in a spot now with Judd Brackett coming in from Vancouver. Like they're in a completely different developmental spot now where they can actually draft people. They can develop them internally, and they're going through the process the right way with Guerin, not bringing people into the fold too early or throwing a first-round pick in as a fourth-line guy when, sorry, that's not how you develop a player. So no, I get it, because the only real move that I've got my finger on the pulse of is where and when does Matt Dumba get traded?
That's been the question for 2 years, isn't it? Because it always seems like, he doesn't want to play on this team. It's not but then they keep around, and he's still, even with all of this conversation, Hoppy, with the will he or won't he, will he stay, is he going to be here next year? He's still playing pretty well, right?
Oh yeah, and it's never been an issue of him not wanting to be here. And largely it's been that, hey, this is a guy that has value, right? And what is the one surplus for this team? Blue line. And the bigger thing at this point, and I mean, this is something that I've kind of been saying ever since they extended Spurgeon and Brodin, you got $27 million starting next year sunk into your top 4 defensemen. That is not something that's going to work with a flat salary cap.
Right.
And guess which of those 4 does not have a no move clause? It's only Matt Dumba.
Matthew H. Dumba.
Yeah, and then you add the fact that the heir apparent is there. Kalen Addison is going to be an absolute monster. I'm so excited for him. That was a great move by Guerin as well. And it's all there in the cards, and it sucks because Wild fans obviously makes total sense that they're infatuated with Kirill Kaprizov at this point, and Matt Dumba is like his best friend. But guess what? You want to pay him in Fiala and Ek? You can't keep Dumba. It doesn't make sense.
Oh, did we also mention the fact that that Kaprizov also has to sign because this is last year of his ELC? Should we also put that into the mix here, Hoppy?
All right, and that's a big part of it. That's what I'm saying. You don't have cap room to keep a guy like that. And, man, I don't know what this contract's going to look like for Kaprizov because it's not going to be an 8-year and it's not going to be a bridge. You're probably falling somewhere in that 5-6 range, and you're probably hopefully talking 7-8 mil.
I think that's why, and this is coming from me. Just remember what it was like being in the locker room, whatever, with some guys. It's make the guy feel comfortable that he doesn't want to leave or doesn't, he's not going to ask for too much. Like, hey, you want to stick around here? Well, yeah, you like having all of us around, hanging out with you, playing hockey with you, hanging out, even though we really can't hang out, but like just be friends with you. Yeah. Well, you got to take a little bit of a pay cut, sir. I do apologize. Maybe one day you'll make $10 million, but right now we kind of have to be a little bit thrifty. We got to make our way down to the single contracts.
He's a Russian. That's not how that works.
I know. That's why I think everyone's just getting everyone's. What was the shirt that was made with Kaprizov like a couple months ago?
There's a couple. There's the Dollar Bill Kirill, and there's Kirill the Thrill.
Oh no, Dollar Bill Kirill. Oh, that's gonna be a hashtag that we're gonna have to keep our eyes on. He's a 10.2. He doesn't have enough games to be a Group 2 RFA, so he would be ineligible for an offer sheet, according to our good friends at capfriendly.com.
Thank Jesus for that. Oh my goodness.
Because that could be, that would be not good. Well, yeah, because we've seen, of course, talking about Anthony Mantha, he hit arbitration, and Anthony Siu hit arbitration, and there's a lot of guys that are able to, squeeze a few more dollars out. Ilya Mikheyev for the Leafs went for arbitration this year, and all of us, Leafs fans going, we already paid $40 million for our first line. And it's not pretty, but, and especially I think and And we talked about this. My brother and I discussed this long, even before this season. We said contracts are going to suck for the next couple of years. That's why the Alex Pietrangelo contract is still mind-boggling to me because A, he hasn't lived up to it. B, that contract's going to look garbage now. It looks bad now because of the fact that it's $8 million and for so long, too.
Yeah, and I mean, he hasn't lived up to it. He's been hurt. I think when he's been in the lineup, he to live up to that contract, I guess, isn't possible. But I mean, he's been everything that you asked for when they signed him. I'm not going to ever blame a guy for being overpaid. That's kudos. But no, with the Wild and with everyone in the league, I guess there's going to be a lot of bridge deals, and Kaprizov is the one guy that you can't afford to do that with because you don't want him skating to unrestricted free agency in 2 or 3 years. That's just not a good situation to be in. Just check over with the New York Rangers and ask them how that worked in their benefit.
Yeah, the contracts are just going to be so wonky. And I talk about the Florida Panthers, of course, and Sergei Bobrovsky is the number 2 down there now behind Chris Drieger. And now Spencer Knight is going to be the number 2 goaltender probably now as he's signed, and he's already practicing with the team. I don't know if he's NHL ready yet, but apparently...
And they've got a 4-man team for their goaltending excellence committee. Oh, my goodness, what a cluster.
And you know what's going to happen, Hoppy? They're going to somehow lose in the first because they'll be the number 2 team. They'll play Carolina and the Hurricanes, who have been in the playoffs the last couple of years and showing that they're grizzled and ready to go. They'll beat them like in 5 games because that's what's going to happen, right?
Oh, and Carolina's going to be the 2, but yes, I agree.
Yeah, this season, and we talked about it a little bit with Shannon, talked about it a little bit with Nathan Strauss earlier on in the show. It's just so weird. You don't know what's going to happen. Oh, the Leafs are the best team in the North. Well, that does not mean they could go down and beat the heck out of Colorado. But does that mean Colorado, who's been hot, could they go up and beat the Leafs? Well, we never know. But let's just stick with the West Division because obviously Minnesota has to win 2 rounds in order to even face another team outside of their division. Now, my good buddy, a friend of the show, Believe in Avs podcast host, Eric Pesolano, big Avs fan. He is hoping and praying that the Avalanche stay in first and the Minnesota Wild stay consistent because he is terrified of Minnesota because of the last 2 times that Minnesota and Colorado have met in the playoffs. I mean, would history repeat itself if they met for a 3rd time? Because pair of Game 7 losses and overtime losses as well, I should probably remember or remind folks. Is that going to be like something in the back of the minds if it comes to that point? If Colorado either falls off or Minnesota falls off, it'll make it really interesting if those 2 teams face off in the postseason.
I mean, I think it's a great headline. I think when you look at how few players are carried over from those playoff rounds, no, I don't think it really matters. I do think maybe for the few guys that were there, it's a little added motivation, but no, at the end of the day, let's be real. If the Wild match up with the Avalanche, I would be thrilled to just hold on to the horns and not get bucked off within the first, 5 or 6 games. If they can make it a 6 or 7 game series, I would be thrilled with that development, given that the Wild don't have a single serviceable center on their roster.
That was the big thing too, because everyone's like, are they going to make a move for that? And I'm looking at the roster right now for the 2014 Avalanche, and the only guy they don't have a single player from that team. Of course, then again, they had the great names of P.A. Parenteau and Cody McLeod and Alex Tanguay, or at least what was left of him was on that roster. Gosh. 2014 was 7 years ago. It seemed like 2 decades ago compared to this roster. Pardon me. Gabriel Landeskog and Nathan McKinnon. Pardon me. Those are the only 2 guys, and Eric Johnson. So 3 guys. I apologize. 3 players from that 2014 team are there. J.S. Shigeru is long retired, though, right?
I don't know. Can he ever officially retire?
Well, it's either him or Hasek have to retire first. And Hasek is, as far as I know, he's in the Hall of Fame, but I hear the Czech 3 team over there is giving him a tryout, so I'm not sure.
I mean, let's just agree that neither of them will outlast Jágr. So. Oh
man, Jágr is still tearing up, and of course, then again, he owns the Czech 2 team that he's playing for right now. But man, I was really hoping that he would get there. He'd stick around. I was really hoping his back didn't give out in Calgary because for me, it wasn't a points thing. It was if he can beat Gordie Howe's number of games played. I think that was what I was pulling for Jágr because He's still in shape. Unfortunately, he's not in NHL caliber shape, at least compared to all these young speedsters that are in the league nowadays.
Yeah, it's a different game for sure.
Looking at now, as we we talked about Gabriel Kaprizov and how you said that there may be another Calder Trophy winner from Minnesota with the initials KK. We got to look at the goaltending here for Minnesota because I don't know what it is, Hoppy, but it seems like when the Wild are a team that has a chance to do something in the playoffs, they seem to have two goaltenders. Because I remember back in 2015 when Dubnyk, was it 2015 or, 15 was the first year for Dubnyk, right? Or was that Kemper's first year? Was that?
Oh, man. Now it's all blending together.
Oh, man. Because I remember oh, boy. Let me pull it back up here. Nope, we're pulling it up. Hockey reference, come save me now. Well, because I remember, even when it was Kemper and Harding. And then it became Dubnyk and Harding, and Kemper. Two very good goaltenders, and they were able to go either one or the other. Mike Yeo was the coach at the time for that Minnesota Wild team, and they were really good. The 2016 team, the team that lost to Dallas in the first round, that was Dubers and Kemper. By the way, Dubnyk now a Colorado Avalanche, if you are just joining us, and of course, if you've been asleep for the last 24 hours, and if you are, good for you. You're probably well rested. The 2015 team was also Dubnyk, Kemper, and, oh, look at that, Nicholas Backstrom. He was on that team. There's a name from the past for you, Hoppy.
Hey, man, it's so funny because everyone just looks at the last year or two for any player, and, he gets such a bad rap, but in his prime, dude could ball out.
Oh, he was really good, and everyone called him the second Backstrom. And we should mention that 2014 team because, Hoppy, you probably remember this. I'm pretty sure, if I'm not mistaken, they only used two goaltenders. Darcy Kemper was the starter because Josh Harding had gotten hurt at that point. The backup goaltender who actually played in that series against the Colorado Avalanche. Could you remember who that was, Hoppy?
Backup for the Avalanche.
No, sorry, for Minnesota. I'm sorry, Minnesota. Kemper and Harding were the 1-2 during the season for the majority of it because Backstrom got hurt. Harding gets hurt late in the season. They only used two goaltenders. Kemper was the starter, but who was the backup for the Wild in the playoffs in 2014?
I gotta guess, and the years, like you said, 7 years ago feels like a million. I'm gonna go with Khudobin.
No, it was not Khudobin. It was none other than the astronomer himself, Ilya Brzgalov.
Oh, no!
Ilya Brzgalov, he went 3-6 because Kemper also got the bag in that playoff as well. That's why it's so funny to look at that team that beat Colorado because they had a young Kemper who was still very good, albeit, but they also had to use Brzgalov to win that series. And I look back and I'm like, man, Ilya Brzgalov, outcast, albeit, but they were able to pull that off. But that's to my point, though, is that Minnesota just found a way that whenever they need it, they can have two goaltenders. This year, it's Cam Talbot and Kaapo Kähkönen. Kähkönen, who I've followed for the last few years, a great goaltender. I'm like, this is going to be one of the next big prospects, best goaltending prospects, because he's talented. He can play at the AHL level, and when he was getting some of his stints in the NHL, he was certainly holding his own. And then they bring in Cam Talbot, who was able to steal the job from Dave Riddick in Calgary last season, ended up being the starting goaltender during the playoffs for the Flames. Looked pretty good. The team in front of him decided to take a big poop against Dallas, but he showed that he could still be, he wasn't quite the Vezina candidate he was back in 16-17, but he was still pretty good. Comes to Minnesota now, I'm like, wow, Minnesota, for the first time in a few years, seeming like they have a number one goaltender and a possible good solid number two, or as we've seen now, a 1B in Kaapo Kähkönen. That's got to be a little bit of a relief for this Wild team, Hoppy.
And you took the words right out of my mouth. It's an absolute 1A, 1B situation, and the beauty is, I don't think anyone could say for certain which one's the 1A. They've both been unbelievable this year. And Kähkönen, make no mistake, coming into this season, no one had ordained him the next one by any means. He had a couple of games in the NHL last year. Yeah, he was the best AHL goalie last year, but we've seen a lot of AHL studs in that did not at all translate to the NHL. And it's really reassuring to see that he's made that move. But, the bigger thing is you look at last year and just how awful the goaltending was. First off, that's just a statistical anomaly. I'm convinced that even if they brought back the same goaltending, they would be doing better this year just from regression. But then you get, again, the up-and-comer in Kaapo Kähkönen, and then you get a guy in Cam Talbot, which I was initially a little skeptical on. I kind of pushed back mostly on giving him 3 years. But Bill Guerin's been pretty candid in saying that he very much brought him in intentionally. Like, yeah, he's not the best goalie in the league. No one thinks he is. But you look at the Wild and how sound they are defensively and the kinds of shots that they're allowing and the ones that they're suppressing, and he just fits so perfectly with that. So you've got, again, we got the regression from last year. We've got 2 goaltenders who are much better suited for this, and they're doing a great job of handling the net together. Like, neither of them have the ego that they need to be the number one. And I would be lying if I said that I haven't been confused at times with how they've deployed the goalies this year, but it's working. So I guess that makes me the idiot.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, okay, I'll be honest with you. I was doing my work for the Hockey Writers past summer, and I was doing some Minnesota Wild offseason stuff, and you know, I don't know what it is. I'm the big underdog guy when it comes to literally everything. I love the underdog story. That's why when Devin Dubnyk had his resurgence with the Wild, I'm like, this is awesome. Because I remember the year before he became the number 1 guy in those playoffs for Minnesota, I was watching him back up Dustin Tokarski in Hamilton in the American Hockey League. And that's why I love those stories. And so when I saw Alex Stalock able to, you know, be the number 1 guy for the first time in his career, I thought, all right, maybe this is his turn. This is going to be his time because Dubnyk's gone. He'll be the number 1 guy. Maybe someone else come up. Kaapo Kähkönen will be the backup. Him and Stalock. And then Stalock gets hurt and they sign Talbot. And I'm like, okay, they'll go with this instead. But it's worked. And Kähkönen, and here's the thing too, you know, you talk about good goaltending prospects. As far as I know, Hunter Jones has had a couple of laughers, but he's had a couple of good games at the Iowa Wild, and he's going to be a guy that I'm pretty sure that Bill Guerin and the Wild are going to want to develop because eventually, like we said, Talbot's not getting any younger, and if you can have 2 good goaltenders and possibly Hunter Jones and Kaapo Kähkönen that are both in the age bracket between 20 and 30, that means you have 2 good goaltenders for possibly the foreseeable future.
Hey, buddy, did you watch the national championship game?
I may or may not have. The guy, yes, we discussed that with Nathan Strauss. Yes, Philip Lindbergh, who, now hold on, before you go, yes, Philip Lindbergh, don't forget, he did not start the season as number 1 goaltender, but he did, as I'm pretty sure you're going to mention, he earned the number 1 job as the number 1 goaltender there for the Minutemen.
Well, and I mean, I don't care if he started the season that way or if he only played in that game. He got a shutout in the championship game, and he is also a Minnesota Wild prospect.
Yep. That's why I made sure I mentioned that, because I knew as soon as he watched the national championship game, and I'm like, Philip Lindbergh. And a guy that, I mean, he, and I said this with Nathan Strauss from UMass just a little bit before we had you on, we did talk about it because, like, he was not going to be the guy going in. Matt Murray was the veteran goaltender, and typically with college hockey, you give the, you know, tie goes to the veteran, and that's how it was going to be. But then Murray dipped a little bit, and Philip Lindbergh just took the reign, and he became one of the best goaltenders. And we discussed this. Had he played the full season, he may have been a candidate for a better candidate for the Mike Richter Award, the way he played down the stretch in the Hockey East tournament, and obviously now a national champion. And I don't think, and the big thing I think with that, Hoppy, is that I think they see that he is still young, and they do have, you know, 2 good goaltenders right now. They're not going to rush him development-wise to get him to come play pro hockey now. They're going to let him sit in college hockey, which will actually probably help him before he finally makes the jump to the pro level.
Oh, yeah, and I'm not at all indicating that he should be coming up with the squad next year or even right now. I'm just saying it's to get 1 more goaltender in the pipeline. And I do have to mention, too, kind of like I said with Backstrom, like, Dubnyk had some awesome years here. Like, it really was a great story, and he was very needed for those years for the Wild to actually get into the playoffs. And just like with Backstrom, he's probably going to always have that sour taste because his last year and a half here, he just wasn't good.
Yep.
And it's a bummer because, like, he really was a big spark for the team when he came in and had that resurgence. And I guess you go full circle on all this because you mentioned how Talbot beat out Riddick, and now we got Dubnyk going to the Avalanche. When I saw what the cost was for the Leafs to get Riddick, I don't know why the Avs wouldn't have gone for Riddick instead of Dubnyk. That blew my mind. I think it's a way better pickup to add Riddick.
Well, and I think the reason why the Leafs went after him right away and probably got him first was because Riddick, for some reason, has this one problem with the Leafs where he decides he's going to make 39 of the 40 saves he faces, because it's crazy how good he's been against the Leafs, and that's probably when it went after him. But I think the reason why the Avs get Dubnyk is they don't need a guy to be the backup. Obviously, Grubauer and Francouz, as we've learned, a little bit injury prone, but the fact that they have 3 goaltenders. But of course, Michael Hutchinson, who is now I think he's the backup with the Leafs. Now I don't know with Dave Riddick coming in. But Hutchinson almost saved the season for Colorado, for goodness sake. So sometimes you just have those guys in the playoffs. Maybe Dubnyk saved the day for you, right?
Yeah, the difference is when you're one of the top contenders for the Cup, you're not going to bank on Hutchinson saving your season, just like you shouldn't bank on Dubnyk to do the same. And granted, if you have a healthy, top 2 goalies over there, yeah, you're fine. But we've seen the last couple of years, they don't stay healthy. And if you end up with Dubnyk as your starter in the playoffs, maybe the Wild are beating the Avalanche.
It's so weird because, it's funny, I made a guest fan phone appearance on a radio, because I was in Denver during that series against Dallas for Colorado. And I called the guy in. He's like, what is happening with the Colorado Avalanche? They're playing bad. And I remember I called him up, and I think it was after they lost game 2 to Dallas. And I was honest with him, like, listen, this is a very young hockey team. This is a team that just walked through Arizona and was able to walk in, walk out unscathed. Nothing happened in that series. They just, bolstered up their statistics. Nothing else happened. It was playing against a minor league team, it seemed like. Now they're going up against a Dallas team that's better. I think that's why I think Colorado's going to be a much better team this year. They realize, wow, we can be offensive as all we can be. We can light up the scoreboard as much as we want against Arizona and Los Angeles, all we want during the regular season. But until we play a structured defensive team or a tough team, they're not going to be the contenders. That's why I see Colorado at the top of that West Division. I'm like, all right, we've seen it before. Are you going to be able to make it pay off in the playoffs? Now, with that, go ahead, Hoppy.
I was going to say, you hit the nail on the head, though. Address the defense. They have a little bit more defensive discipline on forward, but they've overnight become one of the best blue lines in the league. And obviously that's equal parts offense and defense on their blue line, but still, your top pairing is Taves and Girard. You've got McCarr sitting on your second pairing, and you've got no shortage of depth, and that's without your latest first-round pick on defense being thrown into the fold because he's been hurt.
Yep.
They are just spoiled with depth at blue line.
And, of course, they did just pick up as well, speaking of defensive depth, they just got Patrick Nemeth back from the Detroit Red Wings, and they just got Carl Soderberg back as well. Obviously, he's not a defenseman, he's a center, but they're just trying to add more depth because they've realized that, yes, you have McKinnon, you have Landeskog, you have McCarr. However, if something happens to one of those guys, you need guys that can kind of come up from behind them, and that's what's going to make Colorado so dangerous this year. But looking at it from the Wild sort of things here, Hoppy, what are we mentioned before, they are not contenders. That's why Billy Guerin didn't sell the Iowa Wild to some other team, some other suitor to try to find one big player. He did, obviously, and that's probably the GM of the year move right there, because some other maybe inexperienced general managers, because this is Billy Guerin by himself, only his third year now with the team, right, Hoppy? Second, you're right. And a lot of guys are like, oh my gosh, we got to make the big move because we have a team that can win. We can win it all. No. Billy Guerin, of course, then again, he worked with a good guy there, Jim Rutherford there in Pittsburgh. He kind of knows what it takes to build the Stanley Cup winning team. You don't just sell, or you don't just get rid of your prospects just to maybe have a shot to win. You want to be certain and guaranteed you have a chance to win the Cup. That's what I think that makes this big thing with Billy Guerin so important, that he didn't make any big moves.
No, 100%. And again, I think if it's a year where they're actually a legit contender, completely different story. But again, he saw that from his days in Pittsburgh. He was brought in for that exact purpose, to help them win the Cup in 2009.
Yep.
But, it is just a big thing here that this is a team that's nowhere near ready. Because guess what? Yeah, goaltending's important. Blue line's important. I am a staunch believer that you do not win a Stanley Cup without being strong down the middle, first and foremost.
Yep.
And the Wild could not be shallower at it. Their best centerman, which love his play, great player, but Joel Eriksson Ek is not a first-line center, should not be. He is an okay second-line center, and if you're a true contender, like really going for a cup, he's your third-line center.
Yep.
And that's your current best center right now. And no one else that's playing center on the roster right now will probably be here in the next couple of years when they're actually making pushes for cups. So that's why you're not going to pick up that center in the offseason. There's no way that at the trade deadline. Maybe this offseason is when you solve something like that. And hey, I'm totally fine throwing Matt Dumba a first, even throw a prospect in there if you're getting a legit number one center back. But otherwise, it's going to be grow from within. You've got Rossi and Kuznetsov from this last draft. Who knows who's going to be available with one or both picks this year that they have now that they've got Pittsburgh's pick. And hey, free agency is always a thing. I'm a big believer that they should go after the man that's left out on the side of the curb out in Montreal.
Oh yeah, because there is a lot of center. I mean, that's the thing too with this year with the whole trades, and that's why I think getting Nick Foligno for the Leafs was such a crazy thing. Like, oh, he's gonna have to sit for a week, and now we see Eric Stahl going up there and then scoring in the first game, the game-winning goal in that one. But I'm looking at the cap friendly right now. I just want to make sure I got the names right. Of course, you have Matthew Boldy, who just signed his ELC. Or is he? Or no, yeah, he just signed his ELC from Boston College. And of course, cannot forget Ferris State legend Gerald Mayhew as well. You got him in your system as well. He's going to be your number one center in 3 years. Count it there, Hoppy.
Hey,
not biased at all.
I would love for you to be right in this scenario. I don't see it, but I hope that you can laugh at me in a couple of years. That would be wonderful.
Harrison Watt and I are like that. Jerry Mayhew, Jerry time forever there in Minnesota or Iowa. It doesn't really matter. Whichever, as long as he's having fun and because he's probably the best Ferris State Bulldog in the last probably 5 or 6 years. But anyways, going back now to the Minnesota Wild, wrapping up here. Where do you see this team ending up? Are they a team that, because I'll be honest with you, you look at how good Vegas is this year, but look how good Minnesota has played Vegas this year. Because if the playoffs were today, they would get Vegas in the first round. Obviously, Vegas would be 2. They get the home ice advantage. What is the best case scenario for this Minnesota team? Are they going to be a team that's able to make it to the division final? Or are they a team that's going to have a good, tough series with Vegas, but unfortunately experience will take over for the Vegas Golden Knights, even though their centers are a little bit questionable as well? How far do you think this team can go this year?
Well, Vegas' centers are leagues beyond ours still. If I'm being a realist, again, going to 6 or 7 games and losing is still a huge, huge push in the right direction for the Wild. Could they win that first matchup? Hey, I like their odds against Vegas way better than going up against Colorado. But, let's be real. Vegas has chinks in their armor. Like you've seen, they've got a little bit of injury proneness with their defensemen. If they lose Pietrangelo or Theodore, that's a problem. Everyone wants to talk about how Marc-Andre Fleury is just a locked and loaded Hall of Famer, and I'm sorry, I just don't agree. I love him as a player, and I think he's great, and maybe he'll earn that spot eventually, but he is now cemented, and guess what? He has shown that he can absolutely crumble and be the reason they lose. So it's not impossible, but that said, the Wild coming into this season, I had them as being a 4-5 swing team in this Honda division, and the fact that they've clearly outshot that, and as of now, they're probably going to finish in that 3 spot, like that alone is a huge step in the right direction. So I'm thrilled already. As long as they don't get embarrassed in their playoff matchup, whether it's against Colorado or Vegas, I'm calling that a win.
Yeah, I know there's no such thing as brownie points or moral victories in the playoffs. Obviously, if you get knocked out, you get knocked out. But for where this Minnesota team was, they were the 10th seed heading into the bubble last year. Didn't quite go so well against the Canucks. Obviously, Stalock tried to do everything he could in that series to keep Minnesota. I literally thought to myself, like, this is going to be the reason why Minnesota even wins. Of course, then again, he went up against Jacob Markstrom, who was having an incredible year. And then Markstrom got hurt. And then Thatcher Demko had to try to save the season for Vancouver. It seemed like last year was the year of the backup, except for Tampa, of course, with Vasilevsky.
Well, I've been on Vasilevsky since before he was the starter. That guy is just a freak of nature. But I'm gonna give a nugget, a little gift here for you and any of your viewers. If you haven't already, go straight to YouTube and search Stalock super fans, it will be the best decision you've made today.
Man, I thought I was a big fan of Stalock, but a Stalock super fan?
Oh, man, it's literally a parody of, so it's 4 guys in the college dorms when he played for UMD.
Oh, yeah.
And they're doing a spoof on the SNL Bears superfans.
Oh.
And it's hilarious. It's so over the top, but it's incredible. We commented on it when Michael Russo down here in Minnesota brought Stalock on his podcast, and we just slipped in like, you have to ask him about this. And he did, and Stalock lost it. He's like, I can't believe you know about those videos.
They
are hilarious.
The internet is an awful thing. I think I'm gonna have to do that when we go off the air in a little over half an hour, because now I'm interested, because like I said, I love those underdog stories. I'm hoping Stalock turns it around. Unfortunately, gosh, if there's been a goaltender that is as talented as he is, that's been more injury prone, I have not met him. Maybe Josh Harding's probably the only other one I could possibly think of, Hoppy, that is talented, that can be an everyday NHL goaltender. Just seemingly the injury bug just follows him around like a cloud over his head on a rainy day.
Leave it to Minnesota to break every goalie known to man.
Hey, you gave Brzgalov one last glimmer of hope. I'm pretty sure you could save some other goaltender.
Man.
I still can't. That's one thing I have to remind myself, that Brzgalov was a Minnesota Wild goaltender. It still like rattles me a little bit, like kind of scares me.
Well, man, you talk about all the great Wild have had. You're just skipping over all the really bad ones. Like, they have.
Oh, are we gonna?
They have had some real ups and downs. They either are totally on top of goaltending, or it's like bottom 10% goaltending.
Well, we cannot forget, Hoppy, their first ever playoff appearance back in 2003, the team that made it to the conference finals. Dwayne Rollison and Michigan boy Manny Fernandez.
D-Roll and Manny.
My goodness.
And they go up against the cheater himself that we mentioned earlier, J.S. Jaguar.
Oh, man. And, well, the cheater back when you could cheat. And he had this, well, J.S. Jaguar had the same chest, he had the same chest protector size as Patrick Waugh, but you couldn't beat him. That's what. And you didn't have Andrew Burnett's little luck there in that series against the Ducks.
No, and hey, that's a team that overachieved too, but what a run that was. I think that's what really injected the first life into Minnesota Wild fans.
I think that's why they still, because who was I talking to about the Wild a few weeks ago? Like, for some reason, it seems like for a good chunk of years there, actually, it was my good buddy John Elko. I work with the radio station here in Grand Rapids. He is from Minnesota, and he said for the longest time it was so hard to get tickets for the Wild because so many people, like so many season ticket holders, wanted to go to games because there's still that big North Stars fan base that was around. And the fact that that team went to the conference finals in year 3, year 3, it pretty much helped the franchise stay afloat for those dark years as well after the lockout.
You know, it's a blessing and a curse, though, man, because that's largely why the Wild have been just stuck in this purgatory of mediocrity. They're always right there on the cusp. They're either the last team in or the first team out of the playoffs every year. You don't get good draft picks, and when you don't know how to draft, that hurts even more, and you just get stuck in this pattern of always going for it when, like, we've seen it from all of the great teams, right? You have to retool, you have to rebuild, or you're just going to keep being meh.
Well, what are you talking about? I thought Paul Fenton did a great job.
Hey, he actually did a great job on the talent side. He just doesn't know how to work and commingle with other humans. If you could just lock him in a lab and just let him make trades and draft players, yeah, he's fine.
Just being a personable individual, man. Well, and it's funny because we talk about the Vegas Golden Knights. I don't want to say I can't wait for it to happen because it makes me sound like an absolute jerk, but eventually it's going to happen where all these contracts they have with all these older players are going to come back to bite the Knights in the butt. But the fact that the Knights have been so good for their first few years of their franchise's existence, it's going to help the franchise stay afloat for the foreseeable future because there's so many fans that just, were just kind of swarmed to this team in years 1, 2, now 3 and 4 that they will be able to survive and still sell out the T-Mobile Arena for years to come because they started off so well early on in their history.
See, I agree with that way more than Minnesota because guess what? Minnesota already the state of hockey already had hockey crazy fans who shouldn't have lost their team to begin with. We don't need to get into that because it's going to be another 2 hours. But, they were going to sell tickets with or without that sustained success early on. Vegas needed it for sure. Because, sure, they actually are like an underrated hockey market. There's fans out there, but you needed to have that excitement. Them making it to the finals the first year, they were cemented right there and then that they were set for the next decade. Even if they came back and sucked the next year, they were good for selling those tickets, especially with the show that they put on in arena there, meshing so perfectly with everything that Vegas does. So with them, I completely agree with you.
Yeah, you're right. It is different. Minnesota's got the hockey fan base, of course. Edina has, it has a great program, and I actually was able to watch.
Don't talk to me about the cake eaters. No,
I can't do that. Can't talk about Edina at all. I'm sorry. Can't.
I just don't have nearly enough cake to eat right now for this discussion.
About to say, I wasn't able to catch. I was able to watch some of the tournament with Local 45 out there. I didn't.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, well, it's the only way to watch it. I'm just saying, I'm glad it's on there now because they're kind enough to live stream it because it's so hard it used to be so hard because the finals were always on Fox Sports North. So we couldn't watch the games here in Michigan. So thankfully now they're online at least. And I'll tell you, my wife had never experienced it before. Now granted, my wife, I met her and she was not the biggest hockey person. She's a big Michigan State fan, Detroit Tigers fan, baseball and football. Typical Americana. But She met me, diehard Leafs fan, hopeless romantic Leafs fan. And she's like, what in the world is this? I'm like, you're just going to go on this ride and you're not going to be able to get off. Coach, she kind of fell in love with my Canadian fandom. Like we go to Toronto all the time. But I tell her, like, Minnesota is really great as well. It's big on hockey. She's like, what do you mean? And we were watching some of the tournament this past year, and she's like, she told me, wow, that's a really good broadcast. This looks professional. I'm like, yeah. And then I showed her, I think a game from 2 years ago, like in the 2019, back when you could have fans, believe it or not, Hoppy. Remember, guys, when you could have full.
Hey, last live event that I went to before everything went downhill with this world was the state tournament last year. And it was a blast. And I cannot recommend an event more highly than the Minnesota high school hockey tournament.
The tourney. And I remember I showed it to her. She's like, wait, is that a packed house there in St. Paul? I'm like, yes. She's like, we can't even, our best high school hockey teams, even on a normal year, I did the states the last 2 years, or I was going to do it last year, but I'd been to state championships over in the east side of the state before, even with the big programs, the Brother Ice or whatever and all that stuff. The Cake Eaters in this state over there, they're Hoppy for you. They're all in the Detroit side, the Grosse Pointe area and all that stuff. They don't even sell out little USA Hockey Arena where the U.S. National Development Team plays. Can't even sell that out. You go to an NHL arena in Minnesota, that thing is filled to the brim and people are still outside waiting for tickets. It's insane.
Oh, no, 100%. There's a lot of people who are left sad that they can't get in.
One of our sponsors, actually Second String Leather Company up here in the corner, they were at the tournament last year as one of the vendors, and they knew what they were getting into when they went in there, but they were like, it's so much different when you're there.
Completely agree.
It's something I was hoping I was able to do it maybe this year, but obviously COVID. I was hoping maybe next year. Maybe next year I'll be able to go check out and get a little bit of look of the all hair team for that state tournament.
Yeah, that's a more recent gimmick, but it's a good one. I enjoy it.
It is fun. We have been chatting with the state of Hoppy, one of the hosts on the Sota pod. He is on there with Romy every Sunday, or hold on, I just had it. Is it every Sunday or Thursday? Sunday and Thursday. Every Sunday and Thursday.
Sunday and Wednesday.
Oh, it's Wednesday. I do apologize. I had it right up on my notes, but I somehow lost it. Sunday and Wednesday. The episodes go up on demand on Monday and Thursday. That's where I got the Thursday part on the Hockey Podcast Network. Check them out. Make sure you get on there. Use the promo code THPN when you go on DraftKings. I had to use that because I just looked at their Twitter bio because I decided to start reading all that cool stuff. But they talk about Minnesota Wild. They talk about all the good stuff surrounding the game of hockey. Check them out and all their stuff over there at the Hockey Podcast Network. Those guys do a lot of great stuff over there. Hoppy, make sure you follow them at State of Hoppy as well. Thank you very much for joining us today, talking about the Wild, talking about the NHL. Certainly was a blast. We'll definitely have to talk to you. Maybe we get closer to playoff time. Maybe a Colorado Minnesota series. I know the numbers don't look good on paper, but unfortunately, championships are not won on paper, Hoppy.
That is accurate. I can't fight that.
You cannot fix that. Hoppy, we'll definitely talk to you sometime soon. Have a good time with Romy, and enjoy the rest of the season, man.
Hey, really appreciate it, Tyler. It's been fun.
All right, and that was State of Hoppy of the Sota Pod. The Sota Pod. I know, right? Sota Pod? What do you mean Sota Pod? Like soda? Nope, Sota, like Minnesota. It's funny. It's a play on words, guys. We're still live here for the last half hour. Like I said, I do apologize for all the folks that were. I was really excited for the Shannon Walsh interview. Hopefully, like I said, we can salvage it a little bit. I don't know exactly what all happened with that. I don't know why we had issues during that video chat, which is funny because they do video chat themselves, Romy and Hoppy, for their show. So, like I said, I don't know if we're going to put it on the podcast form, unfortunately, simply because of the fact that the quality just kind of was not the best for audio. So what we'll do is we're going to get Shannon on again. There's no question about it. We're going to get Shannon on again. Obviously, maybe get closer to playoff time, talking about those two other guys. We had Nathan Strauss on in between those two. And of course, we just talked with Hoppy. Great interviews all around. I'm bummed because I thought we had it to work. I thought the Wi-Fi was working. I mean, it's working now, no problem. Look at this. We're streaming cleanly. There's no glitches. Everything's great. That's a bummer because I like doing those live video chats because you get to see the people talk. And of course, we'd love to see Hoppy talk. And of course, you can see him talk with Romy on Mondays and Thursdays, Sundays and Wednesdays live on the Hockey Podcast Network at the Sota Pod on Twitter. But here in the final 25 minutes of the show, you know what we should do, guys? We should definitely talk about the rest of the trades because there were a lot of trades today, guys. So let's get into, let's go through the big ones here first. We talked about, of course, Taylor Hall going from Buffalo to Boston. We talked about that with Shannon. It's a move that every Buffalo fan is just struggling with, mainly because they're still trying to figure out why in the blue blaze in hell that they literally gave a second-round pick and nobody else. They literally gave nothing for Hello. There we go. I hit the button. I hit a wrong button here, folks. If you're watching it on the live stream, hit the phantom button on my mixer, and I don't know why I hit it because we lost this mic because this mic needs phantom power. Dummy Tyler here, Blondie. Woo! Yeah, go for the blondes. So back to Taylor Hall. The Buffalo Sabres over the past 2 weeks just gave up literally nothing. They received nothing in these trades the last couple of weeks. Talking about, like I said, the move to Taylor Hall. Curtis Lazar and Taylor Hall going to Boston for Anders Bjork and a 2021 second-round pick. If you are going to sell the top guy on your team, and probably like I said, the big fish, what are you even, is that really the best you can get for him? You're telling me that no one else would give a first for him. Nick Foligno, and I love Nick Foligno. We'll get to that trade here in just a minute. Even he had 2 picks for him. 2 picks and a prospect. Now, there were 3 teams involved in this trade, but like I said, we'll get to that. You give Brandon Montour to the Florida Panthers also last week. Actually, 2 days ago, on Saturday, for a 2021 third-round pick. Now, yes, Brandon Montour, probably not the same level as Taylor Hall, but when he's clearly 1 round of difference, because at that point, second and third round picks are just about the same at some point. And this is my thing about this. It's the league, Bill Zito, Don Sweeney, taking advantage of an inexperienced general manager in Kevin Adams. Kevin Adams, who was a part of the financial team for the Buffalo Sabres, for goodness sakes. He was not an assistant GM. He was not a member of hockey ops. He was a part of the business side of this franchise. However, the Pachulas are big fans of him. They like going out to dinner with him. They like chatting it up with him. But what happens now? You literally get almost nothing for what was one of the biggest free agent pickups of the offseason, and who was the big fish going into the trade deadline. I tried to get Jordan DeShane on the show today. Of course, we had him on from the Hockey Writers, covers the Buffalo Sabres. Wasn't able to make it, unfortunately, had prior engagements. Of course, I understand that because, well, when you text someone at about 4 o'clock and ask them to come on the show, it's very hard to get them to come on. I wouldn't expect anyone to come on after only 2 hours. But regardless, I don't know what you expect from this hockey club. What can they do to get better? If you have decisions that are made by your upper echelons that make you kind of look like dummies. But I digress. Buffalo is going to be in trouble for a while. Going now over, take a quick look at the moves we talked about with Colorado when we talked with Hoppy there. Patrick Nemeth going to the Avalanche from Detroit. Detroit gets a 2022 fourth-round pick from him, and the Wings retain half of his $3 million salary. They take 1.5. Devin Dubnyk, we talked about him. He's going over from San Jose. Greg Pattern and a 2021 fifth-round pick going to the Sharks. A couple of other smaller ones. John Merrill going to Montreal for Hayden Verbeek, a prospect, and a 2021 fifth-round pick. This one's an interesting one because it's one of the few picks that was traded to a team that was not from the original team. Montreal, they gave up their pick that they received from Ottawa. And so that was one of the few times, because when I get to these other picks, you'll see that doesn't happen quite often. At least it hasn't happened too often this year. We talked about, of course, the Leafs. The Leafs getting really busy. Dave Riddick going to Toronto for a 2022 third-round pick. And here's the kicker. The Leafs were able to convince Brad Treliving to take half of that and put that back in his pocket. Only the Leafs are paying $1.375. The big one for the Leafs, Nick Foligno and Stefan Noesen. No, that's obviously a big one. But the Leafs get Stefan Noesen from San Jose, or the Nick Foligno and Stefan Noesen from San Jose, because Columbus gave Foligno to San Jose and then flipped it to Toronto. Toronto gives San Jose their 2021 fourth-round pick. They give the Blue Jackets the 2021 first-round pick and a 2022 fourth-round pick. Now, why is this a big deal? Why is San Jose the middleman here? A, they get a pick out of this, even though there's nothing they really gain other than that fourth-round pick. But since they need to take on some money, they were able to take half of Nick Foligno's contract, which Nick Foligno's contract is currently sitting at $5.5 million, which does expire this year. So, that said, Nick Foligno San Jose is taking on 2.75 of that contract. They flip it now to Toronto. Toronto only pays half of that. They're only paying 1.375 for Foligno. They are paying a quarter of Foligno's contract to come play for Toronto. Kyle Dubas is doing this masterful gymnastics of the cap right now. By the way, the Leafs are down right now to Montreal. They were, last time I checked, I didn't want to put them up on the screen in here because obviously we're having Wi-Fi issues. I want to do that. They are trailing 2-0 in the second period. Also, looking at other scores, Detroit and Carolina tied at 0 early in the second. Chicago and Columbus tied at 1 early in the second. And Ottawa and Winnipeg tied at 2 early in the second. So far, scoreless, 1-1 game, 2-2 game, and the Leafs are down by 2. Arizona and Colorado coming up later tonight. Vegas and LA and Anaheim and San Jose are the nightcaps out west. But going back to this deal here for the Leafs and how Kyle Dubas has just shown that he is no longer the guy that bends over backwards for William Nylander or Mitch Marner or John Tavares just to get him to come to Toronto. He's shown that he's a guy that is willing to pick up the big names, but he does it the hard way. He does it the way that makes it work for his team. Because this is a Toronto Maple Leafs team, guys. It's in a little bit of a cap crunch with having, like I mentioned, about $40 million mixed in with their top line. Well, with Hyman there. Tavares, Matthew, Marner. That's what I mean. That's what I mean by the top three. Obviously, Hyman, who's going to get paid this year. I'm terrified about that. Because he's probably going to make $5 million the way he's playing this year. Hopefully, he takes one of those hometown discounts. Boy, I hope so. If he can pull off a Connor Brown right now, that would be a great thing, I think, for the Leafs. But obviously, that'll be Hyman watch. That'll be for the offseason. But the way he's able to I don't say manipulate the cap, but able to find his way around the cap to make sure he can fit Foligno in the cap, under the cap, going into the postseason. That is huge for this team because Foligno comes in and he's showing that he's going to be a guy he wants to win a cup. And boy, oh boy, do I hope and do I pray that they win a cup this year with Foligno because he probably is going to go back to Columbus. Why? He has a family down there. I kind of mentioned a little bit with Shannon Walsh in the first interview we did. There was a video I saw that came across Twitter, and it was Foligno with his 3 kids, 2 boys and a daughter, and they were getting ice cream. And he was being all like the typical dad with them, being really cute with them or whatever. And yes, there were cameras and whatever, but let me tell you, that right there said to me, like, all right, the Leafs need to win now. The Leafs need to win the cup this year. Win it with Foligno. He can go back to Columbus with a ring on his finger and go back to his family. Because as far as I know, his family's not coming with him to Toronto right now. He's going by himself. So think of that, guys. That's one thing that maybe people aren't really seeing is the fact that he's leaving his family for probably for the Leafs fans' perspective, hopefully for the next 2 to 3 months. Because obviously that means it's a deep playoff run. But if it's so tough, and that's why I think people don't quite realize with trades, with guys that are tossed on waivers. By the way, the Leafs just scored. Marner to Austin Matthews. Matthews now, I think he's got 32 on the season. It's 2-1 Montreal in the second period. That's why I look at this deal and I think to myself, man, it's a big, big move because you're leaving your family. And this was the problem, of course, with the pandemic last year with the bubbles. These guys had to go inside Toronto or Edmonton. Some guys went from Toronto to Edmonton and have to be away from their families for so long. It is such a tough deal to go through it. And that's why when Anton Forsberg kept getting thrown on waivers, he's like, where am I supposed to go? Do I go anywhere? Do I travel? Do I just stay home and wait for someone else to put me on waivers? How tough it is for these guys. That's what I think people don't get. It's like, oh my goodness, trade this guy. Make sure you get him. Like, well, I remember I was thinking about this too. Imagine having a family. When you're 21, 22, 23 years old getting traded, all right, I'll just put the 4 T-shirts I have, a few pairs of pants in a bag, put it over my shoulder. All right, let's get on the plane and go down to Raleigh. Oh boy, I got traded over to Vancouver. All right, let's go up to Vancouver. All right, now we're getting moved to where? We're going to Dallas. Okay, whatever. Move down to Dallas. Imagine having a family and doing all that. It's a real tough gig. That's why when Patrick Marleau first came to Toronto, his family was still in San Jose. I think they are in Ontario now, if I'm not mistaken. Not sure. I don't know. But that's my point is there is the aspect of a family when these trades happen. That's why I think I really see that with Nick Foligno this year. Now, obviously, yes, Foligno is not the only married man in the league. He's not the only dad in the league. I get it. But just seeing it kind of in this way, it's like, wow. Because this is going to be a longer, especially during the pandemic, where going to Canada is kind of something that's a little bit tough for an entire family to get up and move. That's why I think this move really, for me, is like, wow. It's going to be tough for him to go away from his family for 2 to 3 months. That's why I think he's like, well, if I'm going to have to leave my family, we better win this dang thing. Joe Bowen apparently talked to him, and he said, let's go win this blanking cup. Now, obviously, the word blanking was not the one that was used by Nicholas Foligno, the son of Mike Foligno. He will be wearing 71, by the way, with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Last worn by the great David Clarkson, not Mike Foligno. But yes, Mike Foligno, his dad, wore that with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Last in the 93 playoffs before getting taken in the expansion draft by Florida the next year. Looking at a couple other trades or a couple other moves. One that was kind of shocking. No one really expected it. Obviously, the Los Angeles Kings are a team that should trade because they are A, not that good, B, really not a contender, and C, have a lot of old guys. But Jeff Carter going to Pittsburgh. 36-year-old Jeff Carter, by the way. Los Angeles gets 2 picks out of it, a conditional 2022 third-round pick and a 2023 conditional fourth. The third becomes a second if the Pens reach the finals and Carter plays half the game. So therefore, Los Angeles is only going to get a 2022 third round pick because Pittsburgh's not making it to the finals this year, guys. I hate to say it. And even if Jeff Carter plays half the games, it obviously won't affect it. Interesting move because that was really the big move by Pittsburgh today. Looking at it, guys. I mean, I'm looking at it and see if there's any other moves they made today, and there really wasn't any. There wasn't many big moves. Obviously, saw some moves by the Ducks, both trading and picking up, which was a little funny, but we'll get to those here in just a moment. Another one that was pretty big, the David Savard saga. The man that literally apparently everyone wants, but no one really knows a whole lot about. He goes to Tampa in a 3-team deal. This one got a little funny as well. Not as crazy as the move that sent good buddy Foligno here to Toronto, but Tampa Detroit from Columbus got David Savard. They didn't have to give anything up. They retained half of that salary, and then Detroit flips him to Tampa, and they only have to pay half. So technically, Tampa is doing what the Leafs are doing with Foligno. They're only paying a quarter of his salary. Detroit also gives Tampa Brian Lashoff, the captain for the Grand Rapids Griffins. That's a straight minor league contract I've ever seen in my life. Tampa gives Detroit a 2021 fourth-round pick, and they give their 2021 first and 2022 second-round picks to Columbus. So if you're keeping track, kids, almost identical moves from the Tampa Bay Lightning, or at least between Tampa and Toronto. Columbus gets a pair of picks. They now have, if I'm not mistaken, 3 first-round picks in 2021, and they have 2 in the fourth, 2 in the third. Actually, let's click on their profile so I can get that clarified here. Yeah, so they have 3 first-round picks this year due to the Columbus Blue Jackets, their own Tampa's and Toronto's. They have 2 in the 5th. They have possibly 2 in the 7th as well. And, of course, that conditional 7th is the trade that sent Riley Nash over from Columbus to Toronto earlier on this week. They also got the 4th-round pick as well. Wait, hold on. Am I getting the trades right here? Yes, the 4th-round pick is obviously one from Toronto. I'm looking at all these picks. I'm like, gosh almighty. They also have a 5th-round pick from New Jersey. That is for this year. That came via the trade that, where is it? Here we go. Sent Ryan Murray to the New Jersey Devils. That trade was made on October 8th of this season. So Columbus is sitting pretty with picks this coming on draft. And obviously, it may not be the deepest draft on paper, but you could obviously find some players here and there. It's going to be tough for players, for obviously scouts this year due to COVID, not able to really go out to rinks and watch these players. But like I said, it'll be interesting. 10 more minutes left here on the show. Let's kind of burn through these here. Islanders acquire Braden Coburn from the Ottawa Senators. Ottawa did a little bit of selling. Nothing too big, though. Or nothing crazy this year for Pierre Dorian. Braden Coburn comes over for a 2022 conditional 7th. That is the Islanders' 7th-round pick. The Sens also sent Eric Goodbranson to Nashville. I don't know why Nashville's buying anything, but there you go. I also talked about Mike Riley going from the Ottawa Senators to the Boston Bruins. 2022's 3rd-round pick going to the Senators in that deal. Adam Gaudette going to the Chicago Blackhawks, still under COVID protocol as of right now. He was traded for Matthew Highmore. Interesting move. Chicago, not necessarily a big buy, but maybe just a little bit more depth of the Chicago team that's trying to hang in there in a playoff spot. Dmitry Kulikov goes to the Edmonton Oilers, from the New Jersey Devils. The pick that goes back to New Jersey is a conditional 4th-round pick in 2022. Conditions are as follows. The pick will upgrade to a 2022 3rd-round pick if the Oilers win around in these upcoming playoffs. Obviously, the Oilers want to win a little bit more than that. Talked about Carl Soderberg going to Colorado. That is for Josh Dickinson and Ryder Rolston. That is his signing rights, by the way, Ryder Rolston. Not exactly a player on the roster yet. Big one from Calgary. Obviously, we saw the move with Dave Riddick. I'm like, okay, obviously you're going to run with the goaltender over there, Jacob Markstrom, your big contract, but you're not selling yet, right? Well, Sam Bennett's now a Florida Panther. That and a 2022 6th-round pick. Sam Bennett, no retention of salary by Calgary. They pick up Florida's 2022 2nd-round pick and Emil Heineman, his signing rights. And then there was the 3-team deal that sent Matthias Janmark and Nick DeSimeone to San Jose, and they get Chicago's 2022 4th-round pick. San Jose is also a buffer in that one. San Jose sent Janmark over to Vegas. Vegas, of course, once again, having to only pay a quarter of his salary, or at least a half of the salary that was retained from the deal that sent San Jose gave Janmark from Chicago to Vegas. Only paying a little over $560,000 are the Knights. The Chicago Blackhawks only really get anything from Vegas. They get a 2021 second-round pick and a 2022 third-round pick. Chicago also sent Madison Bowie and a 2021 fifth-round pick to the Vancouver Canucks. Vancouver gives them a 2021 fourth-round pick. We talked about the Detroit Red Wings getting a couple of picks and a couple of players from the Washington Capitals for Anthony Mantha. Ben Hutton coming over from the Anaheim Ducks for a 2022 fifth-round pick. The Ducks acquire Hayden Fleury, though, for Yanni Hakanpää. I'm not laughing because of the name, I just couldn't say it. And a 2022 sixth-round pick from Anaheim for Hayden Fleury. Obviously, as a cap move, it's only 1.3, but obviously Hayden Fleury's stock's been going up. Leafs sent Alex Barabanov, which is tough for that kid because he hasn't been able. He came over with a lot of opportunity. Unfortunately, didn't get a whole lot of playing time with this obviously very packed offensive front for the Leafs, and obviously Dubas and Kiefer realizing that they kind of have their set group of players this season for the playoffs. The Sharks will give the Leafs Samela. Holy moly. I can't say any words anymore. My coffee's gone, guys. I only got a couple more minutes left on the show. The last obviously Michael Raffl going from Philadelphia to Washington. Washington gives Philly Vegas's 2021 fifth round pick. A little bit, like I said, a little bit of a oddball, at least that's of the theme of the day. The last trade that is official. Deadline. Jordy Ben going to the Winnipeg Jets from the Vancouver Canucks. Obviously, Winnipeg, seemingly a little bit more of a position for a playoff run than Vancouver, obviously. And the Canucks will get a sixth-round pick that is of Winnipeg's of this year's draft. A little bit of a nice move from Winnipeg. Give them a little bit more stability on the back end. Very tough this year with just having Josh Morrissey. And obviously, you want to have depth if you want to be tough or want to be competitive in this North Division that has very talented offenses. Obviously, right now, if it were to be today, Toronto would play Montreal. Edmonton would play Winnipeg. And the Jets do have Connor Hellebuck, but you need to have a little bit more than that if you want to hang with Connor McDavid for a 7-game series. Unless you're the Chicago Blackhawks and Corey Crawford decides to play well and this guy named Dominic Kubalik decides to tear everyone apart in one game. But that is it for this one, folks. That is it for our trade deadline recap. Thank you once again to Shannon Walsh joining us early on, Nathan Strauss from UMass, and of course, recently State of Hoppy from the Sota Pod. We probably won't have Shannon Walsh's on the podcatcher or the podcast forum tomorrow. Unfortunately, the audio quality was not the best. That's unfortunately my fault. It's the Wi-Fi on my end. She thought it was her fault. Unfortunately, it wasn't. But the video will still be part of our YouTube replay tomorrow, so don't worry about that, folks. That'll be on there for sure. So be sure to tune that in as well tomorrow. Thank you for tuning in here on 12 Ounce Sports. Do have to give some news, though. I will not be doing the show next Monday, or I don't think next week at all. Reason being, I'm doing the ACHA National Tournament that's here in Grand Rapids this coming weekend. It's also going to carry over until next week. Monday is the semifinal, 4 o'clock and 7 o'clock games. Unfortunately, I apparently cannot do my show live because it'd be kind of awkward if, like, Hope and Arkansas were playing against each other. Well, guys, I know this game's on the ice right now, but what about that play yesterday between Washington and Philadelphia, man? Did you see that game over there? Tyler, we're talking about the game over here. No, we're talking about the Kuehl Show here on the ACHA National Championship broadcast. So no show next week. I thought about trying to fit it in somewhere, but I just have a lot of events right now because spring and fall sports are all in the spring right now at Davenport. And since this is my last year there, I probably should make sure I leave on a good note with those guys. So I'm working hard. Oh, also, according to my the lady that's yelling in the other room, I have a wife that also needs to be attended to. So I'll be obviously having that as well. Oh, and I have a dog, too. I have a little puppy, Wixie. You guys see her on the show. She likes to hang up here on the table sometimes. She likes to come on in. But that said, that is it for this week's episode of The Kuehl Show. There's a lot to get to today. A lot of truculence, as good boy Brian Burke would say. Pittsburgh's president of hockey ops. Of course, here she comes right as we're ending the show. Say hi, Wixie. There she is. There's the Wixie girl. And that is it for this week's episode of The Kuehl Show. We'll see you guys in 2 weeks. We'll be sure to tweet all the good news and whatnot. God, what are you doing? She looks in pain. Why are you doing that to her? I'm going to go now. At The Kuehl Show on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Hashtag TKS. Be sure to check out the podcatcher. Yeah, your favorite podcatcher. Check out the replay tomorrow. Also on YouTube as well. I'm Tyler Kuehl saying so long